So with that, we will open the City of Sandy Planning Commission meeting for Monday, August the 24th, 2020 at 7 p.m. And we will begin with a roll call.
Okay, Commissioner Carlton.
Present.
Commissioner Lasowski.
Here.
Commissioner McLean-Wenzel.
Here.
Commissioner Logan.
Here.
Commissioner Mobley.
Here.
Commissioner Mayton.
Present.
And Chairman Crosby.
Present. Okay, we have a full house. We had in our packet the minutes for our last month's meeting, July 27, and any additions, changes. I think, did you have one done? Was that regarded the minutes that you?
Maybe just kind of clarifying with Kelly. I think he's taking care of it. I mean, the very end, the end of the day, we wanted to get a copy, you and I at least get a copy for our plan books of the order of conduct that David had instructed had some tweaks in it, just so we had the right playbook. And Kelly, I think you sent those this afternoon. I haven't looked at it yet, but.
Okay. Any other additions, changes, comments on the minutes? If not, we'll take a motion.
I move we accept the minutes as presented.
Second.
With the
I second it.
yeah, with the correction Don noted. Excuse me.
Okay, I think John was in quicker than Hollis on the second. It was motioned by Ron, seconded by John to approve them with the little change that Don mentioned. All in favor, say aye or wave your hand or something so we can.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I see unanimous on that. Okay, this is the time on every one of our meetings where we give opportunity for just the general public to make a comment, to speak to the Planning Commission on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. And throughout this evening, if you want to speak, if you're on Zoom, you click the button that says raise your hand, and then wait until you are recognized. If you're participating by telephone, you dial *9 to raise your hand, and then also wait until you're recognized. So any comment, just general comment to the Planning Commission on something that is not on tonight's agenda. And Kelly is the one who will see the raised hands.
I do not see any hands raised, so there's nobody looking to speak.
Okay. And now we're going to move to a new order of our agenda for a new item. A couple items is the director's report, followed by some general discussion, things that we normally have done at the end of the agenda when we're all pretty spent. So Kelly, I'll turn it over to you for any comments that you have to report. Kelly or Emily or
Yeah, I got it. So I just got back from vacation, so I was out all last week, but came back to a very full inbox. So still trying to sort through all that. We're having a lot of development activities still. I was just going to kind of do a quick little rundown. In the future, I was actually planning on preparing a little write-up some months that I'll probably send to you guys beforehand, and then we can put in the minutes. But with my vacation, I didn't have any time to do it this month. So right now we got, just so you guys know, we have 7 pre-apps on the docket. So we have 7 pre-apps that are scheduled or soon to be scheduled in the next month, which is a pretty high number for the city of Sandy in 1 month. Usually we only have 2 or 3 a month at the most. And then with current planning, we have a few big land use actions coming up, including 2 PDs, one of which we'll hear in late September, and another one most likely in October, November. And then we have some additional code edits regarding House Bill 2001 that we'll also be looking at probably towards the end of the year, and an annexation in September as well. So we're definitely busy. We're also going to be applying for a Safe Routes to School grant at the end of the month that we've been working on. Maybe about a year ago, we were awarded a grant with Oregon Trail School District to do a Safe Routes to School study. That's been completed and adopted, and now we're going for the infrastructure portion of the grant. If we do land the grant, it would be about $600,000 in improvements around Sandy Grade and Cedar Ridge Middle School. And the grant would contribute about $340,000 to that. So there'd only be about $260,000 of local revenue going towards that, which would mainly be shared by the City of Sandy and Oregon Trail School District. So that's a pretty exciting thing that we're hoping to land the grant for. Other than that, we have Planning Commission meetings, I believe, scheduled now through the end of the year. So just to remind everybody, the meeting in September will be on the 28th. Following will be October 26th, November 23rd, and then in December, we're gonna kind of have a weird one in the mid-month for December 16th. And that's because the meetings around Christmas and New Year's, after sending out the Google poll, I couldn't get any quorum on any of the other nights. So we're gonna have it mid-month that month. Unless we don't need it, then we'll just cancel the December meeting. But seeing all the pre-application meetings and all the land use applications we're receiving, my guess is we'll need all of those meetings, plus maybe even an emergency meeting somewhere else if there's a continuance or an item that goes too late into the night and we need to continue it. So at the minimum, those are going to be the meetings to the end of the year. And I think with that, that's all I had for tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Kelly. Any commissioners have a question or comment they'd like to direct to Kelly or any planning staff? Or discussion?
I have a suggestion I'd like to throw out there.
Fire
In
away.
talking with Dawn and Kelly a little bit a month or so ago, is code changes such as House Bill 2001 that's upcoming. Then we have the tree ordinance that's still out there, transit street front doors. I mean, go down a list of things that probably need code changes too. And my suggestion is that, one is we could all forward what we think that we'd like to see some changes to Kelly. I'm just trying to stay away from not having a meeting via email on it, replying all. But putting those in, and then at this time of the meeting, maybe we can go through it and prioritize. And there just seems to be a lot of changes, especially with the House Bill 2001 and things that have been sitting around for a while, so that maybe we have a workshop or something to work on those, so we're not so much behind the eight ball. So my thing is really to try to help the staff. And the other one is for us to see it out there. What does the staff see as upcoming changes? And so we can help participate in that. So that's my suggestion. I'm not sure if I formulated it quite right, but hopefully you get the gist of it.
And
I have a question too.
Just so you know, on the House Bill 2001, Emily and I are she's gonna be the one working on those, and she's been coordinating with the state, and we're definitely gonna have a work session before we bring the proposed code changes to you in their written form.
So I go back and just like on the tree ordinance, that's been out there for a year plus on it. I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, we hit it again this time. It's coming up again tonight. It's trying to get, I don't know, some traction, or let's trying to work maybe some dates of when date certain we can get those things done. And just, I don't know, I'd rather be kind of instead of a planning review, is do a little bit more on the commission side of being a little more proactive, I guess, is the input that I'm trying to give. I don't know if anybody else has any comments or what you think. I'm all ears.
Ron and I, we've talked about this kind
I
of a little
would
bit.
agree with,
See, I
I
think
I
Hollis,
would
you
agree
have-
with you, Ron, especially around. Okay. I actually have been thinking a lot about the tree committee, and I know that the staff has been super busy. But I think we need to reconvene the tree committee and get that work done, because otherwise we're going to lose it. You know, we need to it almost feels like it's been a long time. So we need to get that going again. I don't know, Emily, maybe you and I could meet after the meeting or tomorrow and talk about getting that restarted.
My comments weren't to just pick, it's not picking on the tree, it's the most kind of obvious one out there, but it's really put more of a process together, what's out there, could be annexation changes, et cetera, so that we see them as a group and where they are at in the process, and maybe the dates that we're trying to work towards for the House bill, et cetera. So it's again, it's not to pick on the tree, it's just.
I really like that when we do work sessions, that seems to be really helpful.
Well, just one quick thing, on the trees, I just like to see us kind of get it done. You've just been over a year, and you might recall when we did this, I tried to push for September or October last year date on it. Not that anything was specific, but I've done lots and lots of projects for lots and lots of people. And unless there's some deadline or consequences, everybody just has priorities, and it just wanders around. I mean, the idea that we don't have time is, it's whatever it is. Everything is a priority, and people can't make the meeting, but I think we need, like Ron said, put a date certain that we are gonna, the committee that's there, if they want to continue to work, but they're gonna get us a proposal by a date certain, like October 30th, and that's it. If they don't, then we'll pursue some other task, but I don't mind jumping in and working on it. It just needs to be done, and people need to understand that it just got to be done. And if you drag it out, those who don't want to see a change, their strategy is working well. So I just like to see us just set deadlines, meet them, and move on, regardless what part of the code they are, what we plan to do.
We do have a really good group of people on the tree committee. I think it's just a question of convening the meetings. We've got a wealth of knowledge available.
Yeah, well, that's fine. I just think that we're, like I say, we're going to go through it again this time. When Kelly and graciously met with Ron and I, we talked about it a little bit, and we just need to have something that the developers can use to kind of move forward, that we can be also comfortable with in the city. And it's probably going to be something, I hope that's a consensus. And by that means everybody's going to be against it, because that means you probably got the right answer. So I think we need to be afraid of, and not be afraid of just calling a spade, and not trying to get everybody to agree. The question is can everybody live with what you come up with? That's kind of the definition of consensus. So I've done lots and lots of this over my career, and I know as a consultant, I never got paid till the client got the report. So I guess that was my motivating factor when I was trying to get a project done.
Kelly, you talked
To be
about.
fair, I think we got a little derailed with the pandemic, but yeah, we need to get back on it.
And Kelly, you had brought up some possible changes to the Sandy style. And I don't know if there are still some things that are in the works, whatever. And I'm not saying they have to be done, but I think it would be good for us to just kind of have a bullet list of things that are being thought of. I'm not saying they all have to be done, but I'm just trying to get a little bit, but.
Yeah, the Sandy style, the accessory development section, the drive-throughs. I mean, there's at least 10 or 12 chapters that need changes badly. So part of the problem is limited staffing with how busy everything is, and I've said that before, but it's just true. And as David Doofman could have testified more than anyone on this call, is that code changes are not required, except like the House bill ones, So whenever we get quasi judicial hearings and a lot of big things like Bailey Meadows and the big hearing tonight, those take precedence because those are mandated by ORS to be completed within a certain time frame. So the other deadlines, I agree, are important to try to keep. But when you're faced with things that are actual deadline by law, we have to meet those. And the other things have to go like fall to the wayside, essentially. Unfortunately, that's how it kind of works.
My comments are not faulting the staff at all or anything like that. I'm just saying is to get out there, here are things that would like to get addressed. I understand why some things move to the top of the list. Okay. I'm just out there of making sure that we as a commission see changes that we'd like, that are up and coming, that we'd like to see change, et cetera. And yeah, so it's that transparency. It's, again, not that anybody's hiding anything, but really what's coming up. We, again, Sandy style, tree, et cetera. And
yeah, I'd be happy to include a bulleted list in my director's report for next meeting.
Awesome.
Okay, Chris, did you have a comment earlier? I thought you did.
Yes, Chair, thank you. My question was more something we had a conversation several months back about. It maybe expiring seat terms at the end of this year, with Kelly bringing up December. My thought was, could he remind us of the seats that were expiring and what we need to follow as far as rules to ask to stay on, or if they're all open seats for people to apply?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll have to follow up with the city recorder and have him send everybody a message on whose seats are coming up and what the process will be for either reapplying or for saying that you felt that your term is done and you would like to no longer serve. So I'll ask Jeff Aprati to outline that and send an email to the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Kelly.
Okay, just Ron, I kind of want to summarize what you were saying to make sure I understood. It sounded, correct me if I'm wrong, that what you're suggesting or would like to see is that the Planning Commission we get to see and hear and have opportunity to speak to some of the issues before they show up in a formal public hearing official meeting. Is that kind of part of what you were?
That's part of it.
Okay.
But again, it's trying to get just out there. What is it? What are the changes that the Kelly and his staff and us see as needed to be changed, modified to the existing code? I'm not saying they have to be done, but I think it would be good to see what's out there, the Sandy style stuff that they said, and then trying to see some type of priority. Where does that sit? And again, things that have to be done by July 1st, or whatever it is for House Bill 2001, et cetera, how those factor into it. So I'm not looking to make extra work for the city or Kelly's staff. I'm just trying to get, here's the things that are out there. And then if there are some hot items, of trying to get some dates to it and how can we help to push them along. That's all.
Okay. All right, seeing nothing else, I'm going to move us along because I think we all know we have a long night ahead of us. And we'll move right on to the first public hearing, which is legislative in nature. So at 7:21, we will open public hearing for file number 20-023 Development Code Amendments to chapters 1710, 1784, and 17100. And this being a legislative, using the legislative order of conduct is slightly different. There will be opportunity for public testimony if people are listening, and I will give some instructions about that forthcoming. But first, I need to call for any abstentions from the Planning Commission. Okay, I see nothing. Any conflicts of interest to declare? Okay, I see nothing. And we'll move right to the staff report.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. So as you know, we brought this at the last meeting, so I'm going to just kind of go over what's changed since then. Just to remind everybody, the main goal of this is to get clear and objective language into the code related to average daily traffic. Since the July 27th meeting, staff has worked closely with our city transportation engineer, John Replinger, and then Commissioner Mobley, who's also a transportation engineer, and David Doofman, our city attorney. They primarily are the ones who wrote these changes. Staff more was just kind of organizing the meetings and kind of drafting the code, but based on the discussion. But really, this is generated from traffic engineers and city attorneys. So questions will probably be best addressed to them. So just to summarize, in chapter 1710, which is our definitions chapter, what's changed since the last code amendments that we brought to you is that the definition of average daily traffic was revised. Specifically, the calculation was removed. We also removed the ADT limit from all street classifications except local streets. We added language that exempts projects in the C1 from adherence to the ADT standards on local streets, and we revised the language related to green street widths. In chapter 1784, which is improvements required with development, bulk of the changes, or all of the changes really since the last July meeting, were to 1784-50 in regards to the transportation impact analysis requirement. So more specifically, we changed the study area to include streets and intersections where the cumulative impact of development is predicted to add more than 20 vehicles during any peak hour. Previously, it was just a 1 mile radius, which was determined to be too burdensome. That would essentially include the whole city in any project. We also added language regarding mitigation. We reduced the number of allowed vehicle trips that allowed development to be exempt from the TIA from 50 to 20. And added language regarding the cumulative impact. So it's be 20 cumulative impact trips. We added a timeline to the annexation exemption. This was a really good suggestion from Dawn last time. We added language regarding safe access, and then we exempted conversions of single family homes to duplexes, which helps meet the intent of House Bill 2001. So again, these are all changes to specifically to transportation impact analysis requirements. And then in chapter 17-100, land visions, we specified that compliance with the ADT standards is on local streets. Before it was all streets, but we've revised it to just be local streets. We deleted the ADT standard language from all street classifications except local streets, and then again exempted the ADT standard compliance on local streets within the C1 Central Business District. Since then, so we were making these code changes, working with the transportation engineers, sent them out, and David Doofman was out of the office, so he has prepared a memo, which you all have now. And so our recommendation really is, again, that we forward a recommendation of approval to City Council with the edits that are proposed by David. And that is all.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to public testimony. And just a reminder, we do it in 3 different sections. We'll have opponent. Actually, for this one, it's just, I think we do it in 1 section. If you just have a comment, some pro or con about the code amendments, we'll call for that. Again, if you are on Zoom, you click the button to raise your hand and wait for Kelly to recognize you. If you're on the telephone, you dial *9 to raise your hand, and you'll be recognized from there. So I'm just going to call for general testimony on the code amendments. Please state your name and your address for the record. And if you could, when you begin state whether you are giving a for or against or neutral testimony. I think we'll do it that way and maybe be able to move along quickly.
Jerry, do we have a timeline for testimony, given what we're doing tonight?
Yes, I'd like to do no more than 3 minutes, and I've got my timer here. So I will play the bad guy.
Kelly's the guy really with the timer, because he's the guy who turns the mic on and off.
Yeah, I can stop people from talking if you want me to.
Yeah, one thing about Zoom meetings.
That'll work.
Okay,
So-
we do have one person with their hand raised. That's Kathleen Walker. And I am allowing her to talk right now, so she can now talk.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi there. Kathleen Walker, 15920 Southeast Bluff Road. I am going to kind of ask that you reconsider the vote on who has to recuse themselves, because Todd Mobley had a lot to do with making this sausage, and now he's going to be voting on it. I think that's a huge conflict of interest. I am glad to hear that the city is working on the development to close large loopholes made by the Bailey Meadows developers, their high-paid land use lawyer, and their paid consultants, including Mr. Mobley, our planning commissioner. It is with extreme skepticism that I hear you've been working with the Bailey Meadows developers traffic consultant to make changes to city code. The intent of the code changes are to ensure that developers pay for the roads, both local and their share of arterials that are needed for the developments. I find it incredulous that after city residents call out the huge conflict of interest of having a planning commissioner who is most often having to recuse himself because he's working for developers, that you would rely on this particular traffic consultant to quote unquote fix the problems with our city code that are benefiting developers and forcing city residents to pay for their roads. This appears to be a serious issue when we have developer consultants rewriting our code. You have plenty of traffic engineers who are not up to their stinky armpits and carrying water for the developers to use. The changes recommended by Mr. Mobley should be highlighted in orange and should be tossed out completely. Please provide us with a copy of all the changes made at his behest and any written comments he provided. If he wants to offer his comments on something like this, like any member of the public, he's welcome to it. But he should have no more influence than any other member of the public. In fact, I would say that, you know, when you were sitting down and talking to everybody, it would have been nice to be invited to that meeting as somebody representing the public, just like he represented the developers. He's welcome to come to those kind of things, but the public was left out of the process. He should have no more influence than any other member. It's totally inappropriate to have a developer's consultant rewriting our code. Our transportation code needs to be written to be resident friendly and not developer friendly. Our city lawyer should be working to ensure that the resident friendly policies can survive any land use lawyer wanting to drive a log truck through a loophole. There needs to be ADT standards for both minor and major arterials, just like there are on the local streets. I completely disagree with getting rid of these ADT standards on anything but the local streets. The lack of clear and objective standards, including ADTs for arterials, leave the same loophole as to when these upgrades get done, should be done, and who should be paying for them. Regarding changes to the plat improvement deadlines, which were normally due within 1 year with a possible extension of 1 more year. And by the way, this has nothing to do with the transportation, so I'm not sure why this got put in except for the fact that the developer representative suggested it. But now you're proposing that plat improvement deadlines be 2 years with a possible extension of a 3rd year by the planning director and a 4th year by the planning commission. So now we've gone from 2 to 4 years. This is bad because the code changes that you all routinely entertain are now defunct because developers are now able to get grandfathered in for 4 years after a code change that was done to help improve a development. Please eliminate this change entirely. You may still have discretionary review of extending a plat. Section 17.100.100 should clarify the responsibility that developers must pay for all local streets and arterial streets that are necessary to maintain ADT standards on local and arterial streets. They can do this with local improvement districts or other ways. Residents should not be paying for these arterials, like Gunderson and the 211 turn lane. Further, there should not be the ability for them to earn SDC credit beyond what they've deposited, nor transfer it to other projects or other developers. Please revise these standards to incorporate the resident-friendly changes and leave out the standards that allow developers more leeway. As one of the fastest growing cities in Oregon, we can afford to slow our roll and make our development code work for residents first. If that costs developers more money or time, at least we who will be stuck living with the development know that the city leaders took all possible effort to minimize the traffic and taxpayer cost impacts to us as residents. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I submitted this letter to the record.
Any other comments you see, Kelly?
Yeah, I see one more from Richard Sheldon. I'm going to allow him to speak right now, and now he should be able to speak.
3 minutes.
Hey, good evening. I think Kathleen hit a lot of notes, and for the sake of you, out of respect for your time and everyone else's time, I don't think we need to beat up on it. But I do want to reiterate something I brought up during the Bailey Meadows thing and everything, and that is Mr. Mobley, and I'm sorry, his ties to the developers and then his consistency of having to recuse himself from these kind of meetings, one, allows us, shortchanges us possible information to come in through another knowledgeable source. And two, I feel gives, if nothing else, the perception that Mr. Mobley is not acting in the best interest of the city. The regulations that he's had a part in, we've already seen the repercussions of those, and that is basically the ramrodding of the Bailey Meadows subdivision, even though it didn't pass, quote unquote, the test that was given. The other thing is, I think that Kathleen really pointed out that I really want to reiterate is these regulations appear to be more pro-development. And while development is going to happen, we need to be respectful and understanding of our citizens that we have here. These regulations, we can't deregulate stuff, but regulations need to be meaningful and understandable. Specifically the removal of the ADT from the major and the minor arterials. While I understand that can present problems, they're problems that need to be well thought out. And it's quite honestly, it almost seems like a lazy way of meeting the ADT requirements to get it to pass the clear and objective standard. We need to be focused on what's doing the best for our citizens, and the removal of these doesn't quite meet that standard. Our citizens deserve better, and we need to be focused on the citizens that live in Sandy, that ultimately, as these developments grow, will become citizens that move in as a method of these developments. So I would ask you that you please reconsider those. Make sure that we're being clear and objective in our own language, but also making sure that we do it with the citizen of Sandy's best interest in mind. And I don't feel that these thoughts are quite reaching out for all the reasons that Kathleen's already said. I don't need to beat a dead horse. But I do also think that Mr. Mobley shouldn't just recuse himself from this. It would probably be in the best interest of the city and the perception moving forward that he remove himself from the Planning Commission. But those are just my thoughts. And thank you for your time and have a safe night.
Thank you. Any other hands, Kelly?
Just give it one more minute. Nope, no more hands.
Okay. We'll move on to staff recap and your recommendation before our discussion.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I want to lead off here. Sorry, Emily, to steal your thunder, but I just want to start off by saying I want to thank. I know the two previous speakers felt otherwise, and that's fine. But I just want to thank Commissioner Mobley for participating in the code changes with our traffic engineer, John Replinger, and our city attorney, David Doofman. Mr. Mobley gave a lot of his time and energy to help us understand how these code changes impact development for both future residents and existing residents. And I think some of the previously proposed code changes that were written by David, Emily, and myself had some shortcomings. While I think we're all pretty smart people, none of us are transportation engineers, so we really had to rely on Mr. Mobley and Mr. Replinger I understand that some people are concerned because Mr. Mobley previously worked for a developer, but Mr. Replinger, who's been our city transportation engineer, I think for over 20 years now, we had meetings with Mr. Mobley and Mr. Replinger, and they were in consensus on almost everything. And that's how these proposed code changes came to fruition. It wasn't like we were just listening to Commissioner Mobley and making decisions because we feel like it bails developers out. I think Commissioner Mobley, with his recommendations, was trying to find ways to make things clear and objective, but also make things reasonable. We don't want code standards that are unreasonable and that are baseless. And I think that without having Mr. Mobley and Mr. Replinger help on the code changes, we were going to run into some big issues that we were going to see basically no development occurring in the city of Sandy. And I think we could have easily led into a case where we had some takings claims against us because our code was too onerous and too rigorous. So I just want to thank Mr. Mobley for his time that he spent on it. The only other thing I want to point out is that the expiration dates that were brought up, those were not conceived by Mr. Mobley or either transportation engineer. Those were conceived by me. In my 10 years of working for the city of Sandy, I've never seen a subdivision, with the exception of maybe one 4-lot subdivision, that was completed and platted within a year of tentative plat approval. So basically every single subdivision I've ever seen, over 20 now in the city of Sandy, the director always grants an extension. And then what ends up happening is we hit these rough times like 2009, 2020, and that delays development. And I think it's within everybody's best interest that we follow standard practice, and standard practice for tentative plat approvals 2 years with 1 year of a director extension. So pretty much every city allows for at least 3 years. We were like the only city I know of that allowed for only 2. And with these code changes, we're willing and we're recommending that even a 4th year is considered. It would have to be a public hearing and it would have to come before the Planning Commission. So if there's good justification and reason for not giving that second extension by the Planning Commission, I'm sure it'd be worked out before you. But so those code changes were included because it's something I wanted to change since I became the director almost 4 years ago. And since we're opening the book on 17100, we just felt it was the most appropriate time to do so. So that's all I have. I don't know if David submitted a memo that I don't know if he wants to go over anything in there or if you guys have questions. And then I don't know if Emily has anything else.
I'm happy to go over the memo. I mean, I tried to sort of drill down on what I thought the sort of, relatively modest changes were. And I do apologize that I wasn't able to get those in with these changes to your packet. We were out of town. So probably the easiest way is if folks have questions about what I suggested. Most of it was just, in my mind, a matter of trying to thread this needle a little better. And it is difficult, but to try to, just put a little finer point on some of the terms to increase the clearness and objectivity of the draft changes. And so I guess just on the broader point about Commissioner Mobley and his involvement, I would just second what Kelly said. Number one, I think there was a lot of time put into this that was really coming at it from, I mean, I can, as can Kelly and Emily, look at this from our own perspectives in terms of being, involved in a lot of land use legal issues, and Kelly and Emily from the side of implementing code and being urban planners, community planners. But this is its own discipline. There's no doubt about that when it comes to traffic engineering and particularly transportation planning. And I think it's important to remember that this isn't just Mr. Mobley's comments. Far from it. John Replinger had a very large role, and I'm sure in an ideal world he'd be here. But as far as I know, there was sort of shoulder to shoulder on what the recommended changes were between John and Mr. Mobley. And the biggest thing was really a matter of trying to make sure that when it came time to actually have standards implemented and be able to measure whether an ADT standard is being met or not, that we got the information that was necessary. And I certainly would not go so far as to say I would know the right way to do that. And so I think the comments from both of them were helpful.
Maybe one thing that it was kind of brought up, Kelly, maybe you or Emily, whichever would like to speak. The ADT caps were removed from the other road types other than local. And I was concerned about any number last time, so I just thought it might be of value to provide rationale on why you decided to remove those and to keep at least one number on the local. Todd could jump in too.
Can I have you hold that question until staff finishes recap, because that's where we're at, and then we will close the public hearing, and then we can move on to discussion. Did you have any more recap to add, Emily?
No, I think Kelly and David covered it well. Really, this is, it's the technical engineering side meets the legal, clear and objective language side. So, as staff, as planners, we're a little bit out of it, really relying on the experts here.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and call for a motion to close so we don't forget. That's what's next. And then we'll move to our discussion. And we'll pick up Don's question right away. But we need a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
I second.
Been moved by Don, seconded by Chris to close the public hearing at 7:42. All in favor, say aye or wave your hand or
aye.
Thumbs up or whatever. I see everyone saying yes. So we are closed. Okay. Let's go to your question. Let me, Don, I said we go to your question. I'm going to preempt it with something because I just want to give everybody on the commission just an opportunity, if you want, to respond to the issue that's been raised with Todd. And just for the record, so the public kind of knows where we stand on it, I will start and I will say I do not have a problem with it at all. I believe even in Kelly's description, it sounded like there was a definite balance. And especially with having the city's traffic engineer working on it, it's not an issue. It's not an issue with me. And I just wanted to give others opportunity to say, because you may have differing opinions. John.
Todd is an appointed commissioner, and he is also a professional engineer who has to abide by certain standards. And knowing Todd, having sat next to him for the past couple of years, he's not crooked in any way that people might think he has a conflict of interest here. He's doing his best. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Was that your hand, Don?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I voiced my support for Todd about 2 meetings ago. Unfortunately, half the commissioners didn't hear it because we were right at the end and closed, and what happens when you hit go from a Zoom meeting. But so first of all, he has my 100% support. He is professional. I believe the word was perception that was voiced by the public. There's this perception just because he happens to work for a living and then brings that professional expertise to the commission that there's a conflict. I'd like the member of the public to get out and like them to prove a conflict. In fact, I believe some members of the public should consider very deeply what they have said. And I think apologies might be in order, because they're just statements that have been made. And Todd has been vilified for just sitting in a room next to somebody. That's what developers and their teams do. They talk to each other because the most qualified person answers the question, where is Todd supposed to sit when he recruits himself and goes down? This is unacceptable from my standpoint, from a public standpoint. If members of the public want to be helpful, then be part of the process and put the amount of time in that we do as commissioners to help us not just criticize, particularly based on perception. So Todd, you have my support 100%.
Chris?
Chair, thank you. I echo what Commissioner Carlton just said. I was on the Zoom meeting 2 months ago and heard all the words he said. I too would like to offer my support for Commissioner Mobley. I only know Todd through my experience on this commission. I've never met him outside of the commission. I rely on his technical expertise to help educate me with land planning decisions, whether they're for a developer or for a resident. I am also a Sandy resident of a long time and look out for the best interests of our city. And I would not do it sitting next to anybody else but Todd. And I appreciate his input and give him full support. With that being said, I do hear what has been said over the last few months from residents in our community about what they appear to be conflicts of interest. And I will echo what Commissioner Carlton just said. I implore you to get involved, get active, speak up, do the process. I am not an expert on how the policies are enacted, but I know that there are always an opportunity for the public to comment on things like this. And to be honest, when you have two people speaking about it in a town full of 11,000 people, we need more people who have opinions to let us know so that we can hear them and make those changes. And I know that Commissioner Mobley will rely on his technical expertise as an engineer to add input and also take adherence to the residents of Sandy and what they want. So from me, Todd, I just want to let you know I appreciate what you're doing here in the Planning Commission, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you.
Ron?
I waited to the end because I just want to say everybody before me, I echo the same sentiments. Todd, and working with him over the last few years has been nothing but professional. And I do believe that he has the best interests of the city at heart. It's unfortunate the conflicts of having to recuse himself and the perception that may come from the public, but again, they're, from my opinion, not warranted at all. And I can't thank him enough for providing his time, experience into making the code better for the city. I've read through them. Is it perfect? No. Is it a step in the right direction? Absolutely, yes. Todd, thank you. You got my support.
Hollis?
Last but not least, yeah, I would also echo what's been said before me by the other commissioners. I think it's been a pleasure to serve with Todd, and I really do value his expertise. And I think he's a solid citizen and a real benefit to the Planning Commission. I do regret that he has to recuse himself so often, but that's just the way it is. And I think he does what he needs to do. And again, I really appreciate him and his expertise.
Thanks everybody for that. I'll weigh in. I really appreciate the support. Certainly in these code amendments, there's nothing nefarious going on here. I'm just trying to lend my expertise, which is why I volunteered for this position in the first place. Yeah, the kind of us versus them narrative of pro-development or pro-resident, I don't think is accurate. I think it just sort of fuels the fire there. I don't think there's a conflict of interest. Certainly my intention is only to help the city in the same way that if any of my fellow commissioners had the opportunity to help the city in a way that came the same. So I appreciate the support.
Thank you. We're honored to have traffic engineer on the Planning Commission. I don't know if there's many in the country that do. It's great. I appreciate our team. All right, Don, let's go to your question that you had of staff on the rationale for removing ADT from some of the streets. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the public brought it up, and, you know, and so, you know, Emily has identified some of these changes, and some were kind of obvious why they did. Some of them I have questions on just why they were, and so I like to have a dialogue with staff on several things. This is one, and just why did they decide to do this or that, just so we understand their logic, rationale.
Yeah, so initially we had just gone, I went into our TSP, found anywhere where it had ADT standards and transferred them into the code. In talking to John and Todd, it sounds like ADT is typically really only applied to local streets. It doesn't really pertain to arterials. I think there was some question of whether we could keep it for the collectors. So I think that would probably be something we could discuss, and I'll defer to Todd for maybe a little bit more information, but my understanding is that ADT is really a local street thing.
Yeah, that was kind of the meat of it. It's almost, when we run into overloaded streets, it's almost exclusively local streets, just because they're the ones that are not designed to carry a whole bunch of traffic. But once you get to collector and certainly arterials, we've never had a situation with an overloaded arterial. So having those in there were just kind of unnecessary. So that was my, and John Reblinger's recommendation as well, just to limit it to local streets.
Other than Highway 26, in other words, as far as being overloaded.
Right, and then with regard to the exception for properties adjacent to C2, if I get that right, that kind of speaks to the downtown area, like Pleasant Street is a local street. So without that provision in there, all of any kind of revitalization effort downtown, community center, any of that stuff that would add trips to Pleasant would be over 1,000, and it would become cumbersome. So it's kind of an example of where we were looking for provisions to avoid some unintended consequences.
Well, in the same light, then, that does lie into another one. In several different places, it does refer to exempting C1, local streets in C1. My rationale is, why aren't there unintended consequences potentially in C2? You know, C3 is the village commercial. The point is I think the whole issue here was traffic in the residential areas. And in commercial, is it really an issue if the street's local or not? I looked at a few streets just in C2. I didn't look at the plan. I don't know how they're designated. I look at Kate Schmidt's, which goes into by McDonald's and Safeway. It's just a little street that goes in there, but it's a named street. And based on the definition, it looks like a local street to me. Industrial Way that goes from Highway 26 across to 362nd. That's that piece of it there. Based on the definition, looks to me like a local street. It just benefits everybody that adjusts it. So my concern, it ties into my other concern, and that is when we say 1,000 as a number, I don't understand why we're putting a number on something that we don't have data that says that that number is somewhat an inflection point or a critical spot that we want to avoid. How do we know it's not 2,000? How do we know it's not 750? So my biggest concern is back to unintended consequences. Todd, I think you know just from, if you're willing to share from a lot of the work you and your company has done, that, you know, we found out, for example, in Bailey Meadows, that on Melissa, the actual traffic counts were somewhere in the neighborhood of 72% of the manual, you know, the ITE manual. So do we really know what the traffic counts are on all of the local streets around Sandy? Talk about unintended consequences. Next thing you know, we're going to turn around and find another one. Now, I could make an argument that I think Melissa was probably misqualified, and I think Melissa's a collector street. If you look at that subdivision, you have over 160 homes. They all empty onto that one street, of which has 11 homes. The only way out of there. That's got to be a collector street, you know? And you got it stubbed at the other end. And if you identified Melissa as a collector street, all of a sudden the whole 1,000 goes away. It's another moot discussion. So the subjectivity of, is it a street, a local, or a collector, or whatever, you know, and where's that kind of written down? So I'm a little concerned if the local should not apply to C2 and C3 as well as C1 when it comes to unintended consequences, because it appears the intent is really for the residential areas. So those are kind of my two main concerns. One is that, and the other one is how are you going to determine 1,000? I know from the analysis that I did, and I've shared with Todd, and because I submitted it as testimony, I know Kelly's read it, is you have real and then you have the ITE. One you can measure, one is the future. How are you going to calculate all of that? You can put down the numbers, but Todd, you know, the devil's in the details, how you do the arithmetic, you know, and the developer wants to come up to 999 or less, and the other one. So I just into too much with numbers that I know you need the CNO part, but I'm just concerned that we have unintended consequences until we have a good basis for the 1,000 or whatever number we think to be there.
Elaborate on a few of those things. So it's an industrial, two of the streets you named are not classified in the transportation systems plan as collector. I think they're, I mean, as local, I think they're collector and arterial, or both collector. They're definitely collector and arterial streets. The 1,000 ADT comes directly from the TSP. I agree with you, Don. I don't know if it's the magic number or not, but I think it would be, I don't think it would be wise to have a separate number than what's spoken to in the TSP. I do think we kind of talked about this internally with Todd and with John Replinger, is that when we go through this TSP revision that I finally just got the IGA for today, coincidentally, we are going to look at that number and determine if it should be a different number. And if it should be, then we'll come back through development code and make it match the TSP. So that will be looked at closer in the future. But until the TSP number is different, we felt it was best to go with what's consistent with the TSP for 1,000 ADT on local streets.
As long, yeah, as long as there's a process to try and come up with the right number, Kelly, I'm okay with it. In fact, back to what Ron Lazowski said, I mean, I'm glad to help work, just to donate my time too on any of these projects to, you know, kind of help move them forward, because I know staff is basically busy. So as long as we have an effort to try and find the right number, because I'm just waiting for the next subdivision to come up and we do the analysis, and all of a sudden, you know, we get hung up again. And the real question is, you stand on the street block corner for 2 hours and you start counting and you ask yourself, is there a problem here? You know, and the number should quantify when we have a problem, is my point. If that makes sense.
Well, with the current code doesn't dictate how you determine the ADT. I mean, there can be a lot of engineering built into that. Bailey Meadows is sort of a simplified version because it's just a dead end street and everything connects at the end of it, but they're not all that straightforward. So there's still an opportunity for engineering to land on that answer. And the TSP update, I think, will help clean a lot of this up. Our intent with the commercial zoning exemption there was to avoid those consequences, but the TSP may decide to have a different functional classification, like a residential local street, and then maybe those ADT standards apply to a residential local, but not a different local street. So that kind of thing is pretty common in other jurisdictions. But the TSP update will definitely be an opportunity to clean up some of those issues. Yeah,
I'm concerned that the loophole in this whole thing is, do you call a street collector or local? And after studying more than I probably should have, but my interest was there on the Bailey Meadows thing, I think a clear and objective analysis would have made Melissa a collector street. It may have not have been designated in the TSP. It may not have been designated when that neighborhood was built. But if you look at it down the road with a stub on the other end and only one way out and over 160 homes bleeding into one street with 11 homes, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck, and it looks like collector street to me. So it's how you use that terminology too that makes it interesting, which also makes it interesting when you don't have numbers on the maybe the collector or the other, you know, not necessarily major arterials, but like, you know, on a collector street. So
Okay, give opportunity for some other comment, input, questions. John?
I have a comment on the 1,000 average vehicle trips per day should not exceed 1,000. That's a number that's a pretty the line is a drawn in the sand then. So if it's 1,001, it's outside of that range.
They'd have to apply for a variance.
Correct.
Basically.
I was going to say it's a quantifiable number
Okay.
within the development code, so they can apply for an adjustment or a variance. Correct.
Okay.
It's no different than the square footage of windows we have and
Okay.
other.
And this is the issue that is frustrating. I guess it depends on your perspective, but frankly, I think when people understand it fully, whether it's from a neighborhood livability, I don't want to see any development, whether it's from the most pro-growth, let's pave the world type developer, or everybody in between. And I am, purposely painting with broad brushes here to make a point that land use planning as a discipline it necessarily involves a lot of subjectivity. And the way the law is written relative to housing, to make it work according to at least the state legislature and the laws that exist, we need to look at that. It basically, as Kelly indicated, through quantifiable provisions, or at least that undoubtedly is the safest way to go if we're going to be having these challenges come up again in the future. So as maybe reasonable as a question like that is, and it certainly is, but what about 1,001? If we have the standard that currently exists in the TSP, which talks about typically these streets should not exceed 1,000 ADT, we end up in the situation we did with the Bailey Meadows subdivision. And so it's by no means, and I think this was the point I've made before. I am not here to say that this is the way to go about writing this code from a planning perspective, but the statute says what it says, and the reality will be that if somebody has an application that comes through and they do have that 1,001 or 1,005 or whatever the modest increase might be, they would have the ability to go through 1766, and then at that point, the Planning Commission most likely would be the body that would be looking at that to say, well, okay, is that ultimately reasonable, or isn't it? I suppose there could be situations where that 1,000 is the exact right number, but that's the card we're dealt here. And it's in this endeavor is really meant to deal with one issue on the clear and objective standards. There are other examples, but in the case of traffic in neighborhoods, it's the one that I think is, and certainly I think that the council feels the same way, that it's sort of the most immediate need. So that's where we are.
I think we're, just want to point out, because I think, David, you mentioned it. I actually testified in my note to City Council that the word typically was used. If you look up typically in the dictionary, which I did, it's basically another word to use for typical is an average. Well, what's an average? An average is a number, that never exists, by the way. You're either above or below it. So what's this, when you have a sample, what's the standard deviation about the average? So you have the TSP saying typically 1,000. Now we're writing a standard that says does not exceed. So that somewhat is in more strict words than the TSP basically says. But it is CNO. So I understand that. And I also understand that a developer can go to 1766 and ask for a variance or adjustment. But I would expect that if that is the case, I think you would expect to hear an argument from a developer going back to our parent document that says, you said typically here, now you're saying absolute there. There's inherent conflict mathematically between those two concepts.
Chair, can I ask David a question?
Sure.
David, this is just for my education, maybe the rest of the commission and the public. Is there a specific advantage to leaving terms, and because Don just said the word typical, for like legal interpretation, because there's precedent set with a certain word? And what I'm speaking to is, as I read through it, and I'm looking for it to be clear and objective and inclusive, I found a couple non-gender inclusive words, I would say. And then I thought about changing those words. And then I wondered what those word changes might implement, like workmanship to artisan, or man-made to human-made. And I don't know if it has any legal precedents that set with using those type of languages to modernize our code, at least in this subject for review.
I think if you were looking to be more inclusive with those types of words, I don't think that that issue would raise any concerns relative to the issues we're talking about tonight in terms of the clear and objective language. You know, a lot of times you have particularly older sets of regulations, older charters, older comp plans, whatever the regulation might be at the local level, that do use a lot of he, a lot of him, written very much, you know, in the patriarchal sense. And the fact of the matter is that not that I think there is from a legal point of view, there's state law that makes it very clear that, notwithstanding the fact that it might use he and not he or she, that those distinctions are meaningless. State law basically just says, well, even if it says something in a specific gender, it applies to all genders. But there is an important, you know, piece that is, regardless of the fact that it may not be a legal problem. I think there is a real message issue there as well. And I certainly defer to all of you if you think that's worth addressing in these changes or any changes. But to answer your question, I don't think it would present any legal concern. I don't think it actually presents a legal concern as it is, just based on the fact that state law has been written to recognize that those gender distinctions, for all intents and purposes, are meaningless at this point.
Thank you. And I do appreciate, I don't have the technical expertise that some of the other commissioners have, so I'm looking at it through a different lens. I do have one additional question, either for Emily or Kelly. As a state employee, I typically run a lot of my policies and programs through some editorial programs. So I ran this document just through an editorial program. And I came up with 690 corrective issues in language, 646 items in clarity language, and over 22 items in delivery. Like the 22 I found out were simply using the word and or together, which isn't typically used in formality contract or in code. So this is just question now, again, educating myself. How thorough do we review the documents that we post and produce? And I'm thinking, if the code hasn't been rewritten in years and we're going to rewrite it, that we take the time and write it right, so that it is easy to understand and clear and objective. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm just asking the question about those components that I found. And they're rudimentary. They're commas, there's periods, there's quotations. It's all kinds of just grammatical stuff. And I was just wondering how in depth this process goes when reviewing documents.
We definitely, the only editorial review we do is each other and Word. So I don't know what program you're using, but that's all we use. I would say that everybody's writing style is a little bit different, and sometimes things that Word catches or other document reviews I don't typically agree with. They all, Word also misspells words that are common, like stormwater, that are in the planning vernacular that I guess Word doesn't have in their dictionary. So we've actually run into issues with, if you follow the editorial practices of Word too closely, that it will actually misspell common planning terms. That's not to say that there's not a lot of commas or a lot of editorial issues. I'm sure there are. So, I mean, when we were reading through it, we look quickly, but we don't honestly spend a ton of time on editing for commas and stuff like that. I don't know if you have an editorial program that doesn't cost too much, if you don't mind sending it to Emily and I, and we can take a look at it.
I could do that. And then my last point, this is more about the technical. I'm just reaffirming, I think, what Commissioner Carlton was asking. I was curious where the 1,000, where it came from. Was it an arbitrary number? Was it best guess? Is there other cities that are currently using that criterion? And I have received some of that answered, but any more that could be added to that would be beneficial for myself and for the public. Thank you.
Yeah, so I started in the city of Sandy of May 2011. I think the TSP might begin the date not correct, but I think it was like March 2011. So it's completed like 2 months before I started here. I don't have the general background of why 1,000 was picked. I can tell you it was done with the TGM grant with ODOT. So I believe they probably used, and it was done by, I believe, the same firm that's doing our TSP update. So I believe they just used the common number that was used in 2011. But I am interested to see if the number has changed with this new TSP revision. So I don't have a lot of info on exactly why 1,000 was picked back in 2011.
Thanks, Kelly.
It's probably fairly arbitrary, to Don's point about trailing zeros, but 1,000 is kind of on the low end of what I think is pretty common. 1,500 is also pretty commonly used. So I think it probably is a bit arbitrary, but yeah, I'd be curious to see how the TSP update goes as well.
I think, Bailey Meadows, not to beat on it, but, we've learned a lot kind of from that. And when people build plans, and I was a planner for 50 years, I was a planner, you put numbers down in a plan without thinking of what the real consequences are down the road. And the person who writes the plan may not even be accountable for the consequences down the road. So in 2011, whoever wrote that down, did they think that we would end up with a Bailey Meadows and, the amount of discussion and what went on there around that magic number of 1,000. So, when you write a plan, TSP or whatever, those numbers have consequences. And so I just want to encourage, when we revise the TSP, to talk for a few seconds, and Todd, really looking for your input here and other transportation engineers on what methodology represents a real number that when we exceed that, a reasonable person would say, we now have a problem that we need to mitigate. Does that make sense? I mean, there's nothing going to mitigate something unless it's a problem. And then see if we can measure that. And the transportation people know way more about it than I do.
Okay, Ron, you had your hand up.
I did. I have a different note on the tentative plant expiration date. I thought the intent was to move it to a maximum of 3, not 4. I'm not entirely comfortable with 4. I thought it was 1 plus, anybody could go through it, but the maximum extension without coming back would be 3, which I think is reasonable. And I think that, again, there can be a lot of changes. 4 just seems farther out there than what I would be comfortable with. But again, that's just me. I think 3 is plenty to get the job done and moving.
I would agree with that. I would agree with Ron. I was thinking the same thing.
So are you, let me just get some clarification. Are you saying that it'd be 2 years and then the director 1 year and then nothing else? Because anytime we have to bring it to a hearing for something like that, it just makes a lot more work. So I'd rather just have the director have the ability to extend it, and then just after 3 years, it'd be over, if that's what you choose to do. It just makes it more. Okay. I mean, we
Okay
could
with
do it.
that.
We could do it so it's 2 years and then 1 year by planning commission, but then it has to come before a hearing and it has to be noticed, and it's just a lot more work essentially.
Other thumbs up on the automatic 2 years with a 1 by the director, and that be the end. Okay. Everybody. So that would be one correction, or not correction, one suggestion that we would be passing on to city council on this one. Because this is, again, this is legislative, so we just are sending along on a recommendation to city council.
Well, I mean, if we were all for it, I mean, my
Jerry,
question, would you just put it at 3? I mean, Kelly, would you just accept what we're saying and put it at 3 to them, or would you leave it at 4 and give them a rationale for 3?
I mean, what we would do most likely is just revise the code to say 2 years plus 1 year extension by the director. And then if they and then in the staff report to council, Emily will explain that you guys modified that from what's currently being reviewed tonight. So they'll know that staff proposed 2 years, 1 year, 1 year, and that planning commission recommended 2 years, 1 year.
Okay.
It won't be in the proposed code. Your proposal is what's in the proposed code, but the staff report will include what was modified between tonight and what the city council saw.
Okay.
Right. You have all of David's response. You have all the ones David said too to put in there.
Oh, right. No, you're right. Yeah.
Hollis?
I just want to go back to what Chris said a few minutes ago. I think whenever we're updating language and code, we should be moving towards gender neutral language. So I think that's just a good practice. Is that, Kelly and Emily, is that a big problem for staff, or it seems like something you can do search and replace?
Yeah, we try to do it. I mean, typically we say him or her or he or she. The other way to do it is just to say director's designee or city engineer's designee, so you remove the neutrality. I think what I've been seeing in our code is the he or him, or he or him, she or he. So yeah, we'll try to catch those. We sometimes probably miss them though.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, any other comments before we move on to a motion? Any observations, questions, recommendations beyond what's been said?
The only one I would just say, I sent a note to Kelly, and this is kind of between Kelly and David and or whatever. And I'm just going back to my experience being a contractor and also working for the federal government. And that is decision-making authority. You know, I'd ask Kelly, I asked him if the city engineer was a contractor or if he was a city employee. And all I'm asking is, can contractors make decisions for the city? Can they do that legally? You know, I'm kind of looking at David. Or do they advise? And it has to be a city employee make the decision. So it's kind of a technical little thing, but just from a wording standpoint, there's several places in here where it says, you know, approved by, et cetera. It's different than the transportation engineer, John Replinger. You know, I looked at those as technical advisors. The city has chosen to hire under contract for good reasons, but the actual decision is Kelly's, being a city employee. So can a contractor make a decision for the city? That's my question. And then does that then create problems with employer contractor relationships if a contractor is actually an employer or employee for Uber? You know where I'm going, David, with that whole thing. So I'm just bringing that up as a real technical point, just because since we're writing it, we just get the language right there if there's a need to change it.
Yeah, I think the way that I've always looked at this, and it's consistent really with most cities, you know, that don't have their own in-house traffic consultant, traffic engineer, whatever the engineering discipline might be, is that is a decision that's being made. Yes, we're looking for the traffic city traffic engineer's concurrence or their approval of the scope. It's not an approval criteria as to whether the development happens or not. I mean, it's really you know, weighing in and giving approval to a very technical aspect of something, kind of what I was saying before, that gives the city, gives Kelly and Emily, planning staff, you ultimately, if it comes to you, gives you data that then relates to approval criteria. So, you know, it might be so I don't have any issue with the way it's worded. I mean, would it be different if it were a wholesale, you know, delegation to a, you know, a private contractor to be approving subdivisions entirely? Maybe, but I mean, you know, there are instances also of cities that contract out all their planning work, and you know, there's still the right of appeal of those things. So I wouldn't say, you know, that at least in this instance, with respect to what this standard addresses and the fact that, you know, any, you know, traffic engineer approval is really getting to basically how a study is going to be conducted, and isn't approving any development per se. I don't see an issue with it.
Thanks, David.
Sure, I had one more quick question. As you brought up the word traffic, it made me remember something I read. So I was trying to find it, and I think it was under street requirements, but and this is probably a question Commissioner Mobley can answer. There was a lot of strike through on the word traffic when it talked about engineer. And it seemed to me that they were getting rid of the word civil engineer or traffic engineer and just saying the word engineer. Was that the intent? Because in my limited knowledge, again, I was a Navy CB, traffic engineers were under civil engineers. So I'm just wondering if there's a difference for the means of this code.
I'm not sure about that. I don't think I had any comments along those lines. Do you have an example?
Yeah, so it's on 1784.50 street requirements, section A1. And this isn't the only place I saw it, but this was the one that had a bunch of it. And it really just changed. The city traffic engineer was the only title that kept similar. And I assume that was because that was a city position. But it was in dealing with the scope. It talked about, it would just strike out either the word civil or the word traffic and just say engineer. And I assume they were speaking about the applicants and who they had working for them. And I was wondering if it made a difference.
In the middle of B, there's one.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I don't think those were my edits, but I think the intent there is just to land on language that says a professional engineer licensed in the state of Oregon and qualified in traffic or civil engineering, because civil's pretty wide. Like my stamp is a civil, but I don't do stormwater. I don't know how to do stormwater. I won't stamp anything that has stormwater. So that's kind of an engineering ethics thing, just to get an engineer that has expertise in that area. And there is some accreditation that's for a professional traffic operations engineer that's kind of run by not the state of Oregon. I don't think our intent is to look at that very narrow credential and require that everybody have it. So I think that's the thought process there.
That makes sense. Thank you for the explanation.
Okay, we don't want to cut anybody off, but are we ready to formulate a motion to pass this on to City Council? The only notation I have, which is Kelly just explained, would be elaborated in the staff report going forward about changing the 4 years to 3 years, doing a 2-1 instead of a 2-1-1. If there's nothing else that anybody, were you going to say something, Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we need to take a look at the being gender inclusive. I found 3 words just in a quick search tonight that could be changed immediately before we propose it to City Council, just to modernize it.
Okay, so we could pass it on to again, it would be in the staff report. My understanding that the Planning Commission, if there's agreement on that, would recommend that the code be more gender inclusive in its use of pronouns and adjectives. Is that kind of capturing what we're saying? We are not going to go look at each one and say change this, but
Right. I'm good with that. I would support it.
okay.
And we also need to include David's changes, Jerry.
Yes, the addition of David's memo and changes presented in his memo. Okay, somebody want to make that motion or say so moved? I think would cover it. Maybe David is nodding his head.
So moved. So moved.
Okay,
Second.
it was moved by Hollis, seconded by Chris to send on to City Council these code change recommendations with our approval and the comments that we discussed that would be in the staff report, the changing of the numbers, the gender neutral, and David's comments. I think that's the three big things that we had. All right. Been moved, seconded, roll call vote.
Commissioner Carlton,
Yes.
Commissioner Lasowski,
Yes.
Commissioner McLean-Wenzel,
Yes.
Commissioner Logan,
Yes.
Commissioner Mobley,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayton,
Yes.
Chairman Crosby.
Yes, so motion carries. Procedural question. Do you want to break now? We normally try and break like around 9, but do you want it now before we get into the big one? I see one thumb. Okay, the thumbs have it. We'll take a 5-minute break. Right, I think everybody's here. Okay. This one is a quasi-judicial order of conduct. And I'm just going to jump into it and get us going here. We will open the public hearing at 8:35 p.m. This is file number 19-050, what we will call the Bull Run Terrace application. I'll begin with calling for any abstentions from anybody in the Planning Commission. Okay, nothing seen. Any conflicts of interest to declare? Okay, nothing there. Any ex parte contact to declare? Yes, Chris, I see that hand. Your mic is off. Nope.
There
we go.
Sorry. I'm not sure if this is ex parte, but I thought I would make a mention of it. On social media, I came across somebody that made a comment about it, and I should have stopped reading, but I continued to read, so I have to make it aware. I did not know the person who commented, nor do I remember their name. I just remember seeing it on social media. So I don't know if that counts or not, but I thought I would put it out there.
Thanks, Commissioner Mayton. Yes, it does. And do you have any a little bit more specificity or specifics about the you know, either the nature of what the comment was or even the you know, platform that you saw it on?
Absolutely. It was Facebook, and it was a Sandy resident, I'm assuming, encouraging other Sandy residents to say no to this and to speak their mind.
Okay. Thank you. Yep, that's the nature of social media. It's almost like reading a newspaper editorial sometimes on these issues.
When I finished it, I said I never should have read that. I just should have stopped. Now I'm going to have to say it. So,
And we'll allow for our Chair Crosby will have an opportunity for folks to raise any questions or challenges to any other ex parte context that people might have as well. So, thank you.
Which is next on the order of conduct is to call for any challenges to the members of the Planning Commission. And again, if you're new to the public hearing on Zoom and phone, to be heard, if you're on Zoom call, you find and click the button that says raise hand, and then wait to be recognized by Kelly, and he will push the button so you can speak. If you're on the telephone, you dial *9 to raise your hand, and then wait to be recognized. Okay, if you testify, you must raise all issues you wish to address at this hearing. If your issue is not raised at this hearing, you may not be able to raise it later in any appeal. Your comments should state why the application should or should not be approved, or include your proposed modifications you believe are necessary for approval according to the standards. If you do not raise specific issues at the final evidentiary hearing or by close of the record, or fail to provide statements or evidence to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue, you will not be able to appeal the decision to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that particular issue. Any party may request that the hearing be continued to a later date, or that the record remain open after the hearing is closed. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. And just before we jump into the staff report, I just want to, for those that are listening, we do appreciate the comments that have been submitted for the record. And when we do have time for public testimony, we will give it in 3 sections: those that are in favor of the application, those who are not in favor, and those who are neutral. We will, because of we know there's probably many people that would like to speak based on the number of pieces of testimony that were submitted in writing, we will be limiting your comments to 3 minutes. Keep in mind that a lot can be said in 3 minutes. And regarding your testimony tonight, we often hear arguments raised, usually on the opposition side, and interestingly, I think they all were raised in some or several of the testimony that's already been submitted. And while they may be very legitimate concerns, Oregon law prohibits us from considering them as criterion in a land use case. Classic examples. This development will overcrowd our schools. This development will reduce our property values. This development will put added strain on city services. And as I usually say, the classic one, and I almost chuckle when I read it again and again, is the realtor's line that my realtor told me this area would never be developed. Again, while these may be legitimate concerns, and we're not diminishing the fact that they are concerns that people have, Oregon law prohibits us from considering them as a criterion in this application. So, and when you do step forward, I will give more instructions about giving us your name and address. So with that, we'll call for the staff report.
Great, let me share my screen. So this is the staff report for the Bull Run Terrace subdivision. This is the vicinity map. It's a site that is approximately 15.91 acres. It's located at 4808 and 41010 Highway 26. You'll see that it's just east of Meadow Avenue, and that it is where DeBarker Road cuts off. This property was previously approved for an 88 lot subdivision known as Vista Loop South, but the subdivision was never constructed. So now it's being proposed as the Bull Run Terrace subdivision. This is the current zoning map. You'll see that there is low density residential in yellow, medium density residential in orange, and village commercial in pink. And this is the current comprehensive plan map. It is zoned as village, or sorry, not zoned. It's designated as village under the comprehensive plan. The applicant is requesting a few things with this application, a few type 4 requests, including a zone map amendment, a comprehensive plan amendment, and a specific area plan, and then a type 2 subdivision and type 2 tree removal. I'm only going to be focusing this presentation on the things that are relevant to a planning commission hearing. So those first 3, the ones that are type 4 requests. So the applicant is proposing a zoning map amendment from low density residential, medium density residential, and village commercial to be what is over here on the right. You'll see that there are these lots that are proposed to be zoned as low density residential. These lots 5 and 6 are proposed to be high density residential. This lot, lot 7, is proposed to be C3, which is village commercial. And then finally a tract for parks and open space. And I'll talk about each one of these lots individually in this presentation. This is just a table showing the existing acres and proposed acres for each of these different zoning districts. So R1 currently is 8.05 acres, proposed to be taken down to 0.59. R2 at 5.01 is being proposed to be eliminated completely. R3, there's currently no zoning. They're proposing to add 7.91 acres. And then C3, they're proposing to increase from 2.84 acres to 3.61 acres. They're also requesting a comprehensive plan map amendment. According to the Sandy Municipal Code, this kind of amendment is required in a village area when maximum density changes by more than 20%. And with the inclusion of R3, this maximum density actually changes by 61%. So that's why it requires the comprehensive plan map amendment. Originally, the applicant submitted an application that did not include any commercial land and that would have put commercial land in a deficit for the UGB buildable land inventory. But their most recent proposal actually adds to the surplus of commercial land. It decreases slightly the surplus of low density residential, slightly decreases the surplus of medium density residential, and increases the surplus of high density residential. But it's important to note that this proposal doesn't put any of these buildable land categories into a deficit. One of the criterion for determining if a comprehensive plan map amendment can be approved is if it meets statewide planning goals. So I'll go through the applicable goals. There are some that are not applicable. I didn't put those in the presentation, but I can just tell you what those goals are. So goal 1 was citizen involvement. We've met the statutory requirements for that by providing a public notice to affected landowners within 500 feet of the subject site, as well as holding a planning commission hearing and a city council hearing. Goal 2 is land use planning. we have reviewed the application against the relevant code requirements for zoning district amendments and comprehensive plan amendments. And we've also notified the relevant state agencies, such as the Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Oregon Department of Transportation. Goal 3, which isn't listed here, is agricultural lands, which is not applicable. Goal 4 is forest lands, which is also not applicable. Goal 5 is natural resources. The applicant and their consultant have shown that the subject site does not contain any wetland area. They did work with an arborist to inventory trees and develop a tree retention plan, which is required by the code. One of the recommendations that we made in the staff report is that they install fencing to protect the site's 59 retention trees. Goal 6, air, water, and land quality. I didn't put that here, but there aren't any issues in the proposal to be potentially deleterious to air, water, or land quality. Goal 7 is natural hazards. The site does not contain any natural hazards and it contains minimal steep slopes. Goal 8 is recreational needs. The applicant is proposing to dedicate 1.426 acres of parkland to the city to extend Deer Point Park, which I'll talk about in a second. We are conditioning that a future design review will require that the commercial buildings that are on lot 7 must face the park. And then I'll also kind of elaborate on that in a second. Goal 9, economic development. Again, with this newer proposal, there is a surplus of buildable commercial and industrial land. The proposed changes allow for the surplus. Goal 10 is housing. Staff concluded that because they're providing a mix of housing types, including multifamily, this offers more options for residents. There was an issue, we got comments very recently from, Kelly, what was the name of the organization? The Oregon Fair Housing Association?
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, where they were concerned that we did not review this proposal against a formal housing needs assessment. So that's something we're going to do. Kelly performed a housing needs assessment in 2015. We're going to take a look at that and make sure that we provide a more robust analysis looking at the proposed application against the housing needs assessment. Goal 11, public facilities and services, is not applicable. Goal 12 is transportation. One of the things you probably noticed on the zoning map, I'll just go back to it real quick, is that this is proposing that DuBarco Road gets connected to Highway 26, which is one of the goals of Sandy's TSP. Additionally, the narrative and the traffic impact study that was submitted by the applicant projects that the change in traffic is negligible compared to the zoning that's existing. But on Friday, we received comments from ODOT stating that that traffic impact study potentially had some methodological problems and recommended that the applicant re-prepare a traffic impact study and get that to us to look at before a city council meeting. Goal 13, oh, that should say 14. Goal 13 is energy conservation, which is not applicable. This should say goal 14, urbanization. The proposed development accommodates additional residential and commercial uses within the UGB. And then goals 15 through 19 relate to the Willamette River and the Oregon coast. So they're not applicable to the city of Sandy. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these zoning districts. Lots 1 through 4 are proposed to be zoned as low density residential. We did the calculations and found that they meet the density requirements. We do have some questions about the building potential on lots 3 and 4. That's these 2 lots right down here. These will have a reduced buildable area as a result of setbacks from Dubarco and this Street A right here, as well as some required easements. So we recommend that the applicant submit a building footprint plan prior to the city council hearing so we can ensure that those are in fact developable lots. Lots 5 and 6 are proposed to be high density residential. The density requirements for lots of those sizes allow for a maximum of 158 units. We are conditioning that a future design review application will include a review of all the development standards, minimum requirements, and additional requirements for high density residential multifamily units. Lot 7 is being proposed as village commercial, or C3. The code allows this zoning district to include a mix of commercial and residential uses. And again, we are conditioning a future design review application to include a review of all of the relevant code requirements. One of the things that we're also, one of the things that we're also looking at is requiring along here, having all of these commercial buildings face the parkland, as well as have activated frontages to make it a little more pedestrian friendly. The applicant is also proposing a specific area plan overlay. This is just text that I took from the code explaining what that is. It's a shifting of the underlining zoning district boundaries to accommodate development constraints, and land divisions for specific development proposals may be allowed through approval of a specific area plan. It goes on to say that these specific area plans are intended to promote coordinated planning concepts and pedestrian-oriented mixed-use developments. I wanted to get into a few specifics on parkland dedication. The development, according to the calculation, requires 1.41 acres of parkland, and the applicant is proposing 1.426 acres. And you'll notice that it is this extension off this existing dedicated parkland to create Deer Point Park. We recommend that the design review approval for Lot 7 include those activated frontages facing the parkland that I was talking about a second ago. We're also conditioning that the applicant install a walkway between the park and Lot 7 that connects Fawn Street, which is this right here, to the sidewalk along Highway 26. So again, emphasizing pedestrian-oriented development. We also recommend that the design review approval for Lot 7 for that village commercial lot incorporate a landscape buffer that provides visibility between the commercial lot and the parkland, but provides a visually aesthetic separation between the two land uses. We did receive ODOT comments very recently that we were not able to, we didn't get them in time to include them in the staff report. The applicant will require to apply for a grant of access through ODOT to connect Dubarco to Highway 26. And then ODOT also let us know that since a future year traffic analysis is necessary to make TPR findings, as well as for the grant of access submittal, ODOT recommends that the applicant be required to provide an updated traffic impact study to ODOT for review and comment prior to the October City Council hearing, where a decision is going to be made on the land use action. I also wanted to review the public comments. We received a number of public comments. A lot of residents are passionate about this and making sure that the development that happens is what's in the best interest for Sandy residents, especially for those residents who live, along Meadow Avenue and Fawn. Some of the concerns include a loss of trees, potentially lowering the aesthetic quality of the neighborhood. And they also provide privacy for existing homes as well. Some were concerned about the capacity of the police to effectively patrol multifamily dwelling areas. With that, the possibility of criminal activity at multifamily dwelling areas. we received a few comments of people being previously told by realtors that the land would not be developed as residential. A number of people were concerned about the effects of high density multifamily housing on their property values for single family homes. And then we also received a number of letters concerned about the relevance of this development to the comprehensive plan, and that this is potentially what's called spot zoning. So that is the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. How do I? Oh.
Yeah, I just want to add a few other words.
Sure.
So the applicant submitted a letter with some suggested edits to the conditions list. We can go through those more as we go through the meeting. Staff is not against the majority of them. A few of these suggested edits to the conditions we still believe need more work than what was submitted by the applicant, but we think that most of them can be probably worked through and come to a reasonable consensus. There were a few recommended conditions that the applicant's recommending striking regarding green streets, lot access, that we would recommend keeping in. So I'm sure the applicant will be going through that conditions list, but I just want to bring it up and that it has been added to the packet for tonight. Shelley also mentioned there's the Fair Housing Council letter, which was added to the agenda as well, but is separate from the packet. There's also a letter from MoDOT, as Shelley mentioned, and then there's also a number of comments that we received through 3 p.m. today. We did receive a comment from Makoto Lane, I believe closer to 4 o'clock. That is not on the agenda tonight, that I forwarded to the entirety of the Planning Commission. It is part of the record, but it's not going to be on the website until the next meeting on this land use matter. And then I believe we just received an email from Kathleen Walker at 7:20. I have not even opened the email, but, well, I've opened the email, but I have not opened the document. There's a document attached to it. It looks like it was sent to all the planning commissioners as well. So that's part of the record as well, although I don't know if anybody else had time to read it. I certainly have not. So I just want to let you know there are other documents, and there'll probably be continued to be documents even after tonight that are submitted. That's all I have.
Okay. Either Shelley or Kelly, or even David, if necessary, could you kind of give us a review on, we're talking about us making a decision on this, but then also city council making a decision. How do, how do they coordinate?
Yeah, so you're just making a recommendation that will then be heard by the city council at a future date. Right now it's set for October 19th. However, that's subject to change depending on what happens tonight. But right now the plan is that you would give a recommendation, and then your recommendation would be forwarded to city council for them to make a decision on the hearing or on the subject matter.
Okay. With that said, you can activate the applicant for their 15-minute presentation.
I think they can go ahead.
Yep.
Are you able to hear us? All right, thank you. Yeah, my name is Tracy Brown, and I live at 17075 Fur Drive in Sandy. I'm a land use planner. And tonight, I'm going to give an overview of the project and review some of the project details, give a little bit of a history about the property itself, and then go over some key code items. Then I'm going to have Ray Moore of All County Surveyors and Engineers talk about some of the site development constraints of the property. And then Mike Ard, who's sitting behind us, will come up. He's the traffic consultant and can discuss the traffic study and the most recent ODOT letter we received. So thank you again, and we really appreciate the staff report and Shelley's review of the application. And, you know, for the most part, as Kelly mentioned, we didn't really have a lot of concern with most of the conditions. of the approximately 60 conditions, there's about 13 that we kind of flagged as something to bring up and see if we can work out a resolution with. So again, as Kelly mentioned, we're requesting a comprehensive plan amendment. And part of the reason for this request is we're proposing to designate parkland. And for some reason, the village comprehensive plan designation doesn't have parkland as a permitted zoning type in the comp plan. And so that's probably kind of a technicality, but it does trigger unto itself a comprehensive plan map amendment to allow our proposed park to be incorporated into the village. In addition, as Kelly mentioned, we're requesting to increase the density on the site by more than 20%. There's also the zoning map amendment, and we're modifying the C3 by increasing the amount of C3 zoning. We're proposing to eliminate the R2 zoning and kind of replace that with R3 zoning. And then we're keeping some of the R1, which is the low density residential zoning. We're also proposing a 1.43 acre park. So as she mentioned, we also are proposing a specific area plan to allow us to shift the zoning designations on the property a little bit. And there's a tree protection covenant or condition, and we're proposing to preserve more than the required number of trees with a conservation easement on the property. And in addition to that, DeBarco Road would be extended through the site. And this is a road that's been in the city's transportation system plan for quite a while, quite a number of years. So this would kind of come to the fruition as the final leg of DeBarco Road, essentially. In addition, dedicating, as I said, 1.43 acres. This would be mirroring the parkland that was dedicated with the Deer Point subdivision in 2007. That's kind of laid fallow and never been really developed as a park. In addition, we're going to be installing an 18-inch water line through the site, and this will provide additional fire flow for this and other developments south of this property. And as I already mentioned, increasing the area devoted to the C3 zoning. The previous approval, I was the planning director of the city of Sandy during the submittal of the previous approval. That was called the Vista Loop South. That was approved in 2006. And because of the crash in the economy in 2008 and the cost of the improvements to this site along Highway 26 frontage, it did never get built before it expired in the 2-year time frame. In 2011, the applicant, it was purchased by another property owner, and that applicant applied to the city council to have the subdivision reinstated. And the city council at that time had crafted an ordinance to allow certain subdivisions that expired kind of in that time frame of the economic crash to be reinstated for up to 2 more years. And so that was reinstated, but then again, because of permitting, it did expire in 2013. So it was reinstated. They tried to get the approval through ODOT, and because of the cost of those improvements and the size of the development, it again fell by the wayside. So roughly, we estimate that roughly $750,000 to $1 million has been spent on this property trying to bring a development that's viable given the extensive amount of infrastructure on the property. And that's part of the reason for the application that we've submitted. We don't feel that the property can support that level of infrastructure with the current zoning. That's why we're proposing the zoning mix that we are. Again, the DeBarco Road and also another road. Why don't we bring up the
can we
plan?
share the screen?
Yeah, I was going to share the screen real quick to show.
You should have the ability to. I turned it on. Let me know if you're having problems with it.
Oh, yeah.
Can you see it okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of share this. So DeBarco Road and that road that kind of stubs to the south is also in the transportation system plan, identified as new road in the transportation system plan. So both of those would be constructed with the development. In addition, as mentioned, that we're proposing to dedicate 1.43 acres of parkland directly to the east of the existing park. I did meet 2 times with the Parks Board and kind of went through the proposal with them. And essentially, with the first time we did it was the original plan, and one of their primary comments was the amount of frontage along Highway 26. And so if I had a picture of the original plan, that had a much larger park. Actually, it was about almost 2 acres. And we, through the kind of discussion with the Parks Board, as well as talking to the applicant, we revised the proposal to reduce the size of the park and the frontage along the highway. It still exceeds the required parkland by the code. So with that, we met on July 10th, or June 10 and July 8. And I didn't ever see the minutes of those meetings in the packet. And we just sent those to Kelly to be included in the record for this application. So you can see what the discussion was with the Parks Board. And I would say generally a favorable discussion about the proposed park. At that meeting, we also pitched the idea of the developer entering into an agreement with the city to construct park improvements, not only on the subject property, but also on the existing undeveloped parkland. And there seemed to be quite a bit of interest in that. We felt like that would be a win-win for both the existing residents in the subdivision as well as this development. And since the developer will be out there anyway doing improvements, it kind of makes sense. You can just unshare that now. So I just wanted to quickly go through some of the code criteria that are kind of most pertinent to this. So the code criteria for the comprehensive plan amendment requires that the application, the change being proposed is the best means of meeting the identified public need, and that the change conforms to the applicable statewide planning goals. And so the public needs, I feel, that are identified with this proposal are the extension of DeBarco Road, which has been identified in the TSP for many years, the additional parkland that's being proposed with the development, as well as the increase of commercial property area in the development. In addition, we're proposing with this development, and if it's built to fruition, there would be additional tax revenues to the city and the additional increase in the supply of housing options in the city. You know, the cost of DeBarco really was the primary reason I believe the development was not ever built in 2006 and 2013. We feel this proposal is a little more economically sound in that regard, even with the dedication of parkland. The primary goals that need to be addressed, Shelley went through them, you know, in a good summary. I think goal 9, which is the economy, goal 10, housing and transportation, which is goal 12, are really key. And that we've shown in our analysis, as well as the city staff report, have shown that all of these goals would be met. We'll talk a little bit more about goal 12, transportation, in a minute, and some of the comments we received from ODOT. But the proposal would not cause a deficit in any of the land categories in the city, and it would provide additional housing options, as well as maintain a surplus in all of the residential land categories. The subdivision criteria are identified in the staff report, and the proposal clearly meets all of the relevant subdivision criteria to be approved. So I didn't want to go too long with this. I do want to mention that after we have our second opportunity to provide discussion, we would like to go through the items in the conditions, the 13 changes we're requesting to the conditions. But in summary, you know, we feel that the proposed 7-lot subdivision will provide a mixed-use environment with the commercial, high-density residential, and some low-density, as well as the parkland. With the construction of DeBarco Road through the property, this will be a key link in the city's transportation infrastructure, as well as the construction of the 18-inch water line for increasing fire suppression capacity. With that, we are requesting you approve the development. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Ray Moore to talk a little bit about more of the site constraints and the civil engineering questions on the site.
Thanks, Tracy, and I'd like to also thank staff. Appreciate all your hard work. I know you're busy and swamped, and everybody wants vacation time, and it's a tough time of year to get things done, but I do appreciate all your work. With that said, I would like to share the screen again, Kelly, if I can do that.
Can you give us your address, Ray? It's probably, I know it's in 100 different minutes already, but.
Understood, no problem. Sorry about that. Again, Ray Moore, All County Surveyors and Planners, P.O. Box 955, Sandy, Oregon. And so just real quickly, I'm going to walk you through, you know, public utilities and site constraints and whatnot. You know, the first thing we do is we always look at try to save as many trees as we can, right? We're currently saving 59 trees. Code requires currently 3 trees per acre, so the minimum required is 48. So we've exceeded that with this current layout. So the next thing we kind of look at is road. You know, how do we lay this thing out? And we pretty much were dictated on where DeBarco is. DeBarco is currently stubbed on our west property line, so it has to extend up through to the intersection with Vista Loop. And given the minimum radius is required for the arterial street, you know, works out. There's no really, there's no other option for this street based on the radiuses and where we have to tie into. The next thing we looked at, the developer was you know, aware we're up against single family residential, and we'd like to mirror that on this side. So that dictated a second street, a connection to Fawn, and we're calling this Street A. The future street plan required another street stemming to the south, and we're calling this Street B for now, and that is a collector street. So that pretty much dictated the streets. The parks, like Tracy mentioned, the desire was to have a park just kind of mirrored what was there now. And with that, you know, we look at the other utilities. So currently there's an 8-inch water line running through the site that will get rebuilt. Sanitary sewer, well, let me flip to the utility page here. Actually, while we're on this page, this is the slope analysis. So there are some steep slopes, 25 up to the red is 35%. The orange is between 25 and 35, and then no shading is less than 25. But we are up against some fairly steep slopes in this area. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I keep flipping by it. G5. There we go. It's taking a while to load. So back to utilities. So first thing we look at too is sanitary sewer. There's an existing sanitary sewer stub right here at this point, and so we're proposing to extend sanitary sewer into the site, and then up Street A and up Street B. Water we're going to loop from Fawn down to DeBarco and then out to Highway 26. So there will be actually two water lines in DeBarco. Stormwater, the low point of the site is right at the park. And if anybody's been out there, you've seen there's a catch basin, a pipe inlet here at the kind of the middle of the park. So all of our storm drainage ultimately goes through that pipe. With final engineering, we'll be doing downstream analysis, analyzing the existing pipe's capacity. But we're required by code to provide detention. So we're doing a public stormwater detention pond right here on just north of Lot 1. The on-site, the future development for the larger parcels will provide on-site detention within those developments. So the pond that we're proposing is going to detain and treat the stormwater from the new public streets that are proposed. So that's kind of it as far as an engineering standpoint. I did want to point out to get to the grade, if you've been out here and stood kind of up here on the highway and looked into the site, there's quite a bit of grade drop getting down to this low point. And so with that said, we're placing quite a bit of fill across here to get the DeBarco extension. And there was a mention from Kelly earlier about doing green streets. And I guess, first of all, I wasn't really sure. I don't see a green street requirement in the code, but I am hesitant doing a green street through this fill section. You know, it's never a good idea to, let me back up. So the idea of green streets is to infiltrate stormwater, to the maximum extent that's practical. The problem trying to do that in a structural fill is it weakens the fill and can cause destabilization. So if we were forced to do a green street, I would probably end up lining the rain gardens with some sort of liner so it doesn't infiltrate into the compacted soil. So it sort of defeats the purpose in a way. So we're sort of pushed back on the green street requirement. Other than that, I think that's it. This is the area I don't think we pointed out yet. These are the trees that we're going to save, propose to save. There's a group right here and then some in the park. Something that did come up, there's a condition of approval to build a sidewalk connecting from this bulb north up to the highway. And so, we have some of the trees we're trying to save is right in that same corridor of the sidewalk. So that's something that we'll have to work with to try to build a sidewalk around it or do something, or worst case, have to take a few more trees out, but we'll still be above the minimum number required. And like Tracy pointed out, once we kind of hear from Kelly what conditions that Tracy proposed, which ones you want to discuss, we can go into a little more detail on this. But with that said, I'll let Mike Ard speak.
Thank you. For the record, Mike Ard with Ard Engineering. Address is 17790 Southwest Dodson Drive, Sherwood, Oregon 97140, and I'm the transportation engineer that prepared the traffic study for this project. The analysis included two major components, one for the zone change and one for the actual proposed development. When we looked at the zone change, we determined that the change in zoning is not going to substantially change the number of trips that can be generated by the property, and therefore meets the requirements of Oregon's transportation planning rule. When we did the analysis of the proposed development, we considered several connection scenarios that were possible and made the determination that the transportation system was capable of supporting the traffic loads associated with any of those. From input from the city and ODOT, the desire is for a full access connection between DeBarco Road and Highway 26, and that's the scenario that we have in our plans reflected currently. ODOT did enter into the record today some information that indicated they had concerns about our transportation planning rule analysis, and I wanted to provide you just a little bit of information about that. Specifically, what happened there is that under existing conditions, there are approximately 15.9 acres that are zoned in 3 different categories. When we go to the proposed development, about 2.21 acres of that is dedicated into public right-of-way. And so when we did the comparison between the existing and the proposed zoning using the actual acreages of each zone, the totals of them differ by 2.21 acres. And what ODOT said in response to our analysis is that even under the existing zoning, you're going to lose some land to public right-of-way. So there should be more of an apples to apples comparison. It's about 15% of the land area. If we did modify our analysis to reflect a 15% lower trip generation for existing conditions, what we would find is approximately an increase of 16 trips during the morning peak hour and 24 during the evening peak hour, which would put it firmly below your current threshold that requires analysis of 50 trips during the peak hour. The PM would actually, interestingly, be slightly above the analysis threshold under your proposed code that was before you earlier this evening. We do believe that that increase is going to be fairly minimal. We plan to work with the Oregon Department of Transportation to make sure that they're happy with our analysis. Ultimately, as you're aware, you are the decision maker on this. And ODOT is a commenting body, so we will be working with ODOT, but ultimately trying to get concurrence from John Replinger, your consultant, to make sure that the city staff and everybody is happy with the analysis we've prepared and we've met the requirements. The one other thing that I did want to raise with respect to this is that there's a proposed condition of approval that asks us to go through a grant of access process with the Oregon Department of Transportation. And we have requested just striking the phrase grant of access and instead substituting the word approval. So rather than saying obtain a grant of access for the intersection of DeBarco Road and Highway 26 from ODOT, it would say obtain approval for the intersection of DeBarco Road and Highway 26 from ODOT. The reason for that change is that we have not yet been convinced 100% that a grant of access is the correct process and are still pursuing the idea of an indenture of access as an alternative to that. So approval is a catch-all that would cover both of those scenarios regardless of where we end up on that. And with that, that concludes my brief summary of the transportation study. If you do have questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you.
Yeah, that concludes our presentation. And if you did have any questions for us at this point, we could try to answer those before you move into the next stage of the hearing.
I think in the interest of time that we'll move on to public testimony to move that. So now we will go to public testimony. And just as a review, there will be three separate opportunities. First, for those that are in favor of the application. And then we will give opportunity for testimony for those who are not in favor or oppose it. And finally, for those who are neutral on it, may just have a question or a comment. Keep in mind that public testimony is just that. You are giving testimony to the Planning Commission for the record. It is not an opportunity for discussion with the Planning Commission. So if you ask a question, you'll probably get blank stares back from us. Staff usually keeps track of the questions that are asked and seek to cover them in their recap. Please try to avoid repetition in the interest of time tonight if someone else has already expressed the same thoughts. It's sufficient to state that you agree with the statements of the previous person. Even if that's all you say, that's fine. If you have any documents, maps, or letters that you wish to have considered by the body, they must be formally placed in the record of this proceeding. And to do that, either before or after you speak, email your materials to planning@ci.sandy.or.us. And staff will make sure that your evidence is properly processed. Again, also to give testimony, if you're on the Zoom call, click the raised hand button at the appropriate time and wait to be recognized. If you're on the telephone, you dial *9 to raise your hand at the appropriate time and then wait to be recognized. So with all that as background, we will move into testimony in favor of the proposal. If you are in favor of the proposal, the application, want to give testimony, please, quote unquote, step up to the podium and give us your name and your address for the record. And it was my understanding that if this is also going to City Council, there would be a second opportunity for testimony at a later date. So with that, if you're in favor, please raise your hand to be recognized. Okay. We will move on to opponent testimony. If you are against the proposal, raise your hand to be recognized.
I see one hand raised so far. It's from Kathleen Walker, and I'm allowing her to speak right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Kathleen Walker, 15920 Southeast Bluff Road. I'm asking that, formally asking that the record be left open. So many folks could not 74 pages of staff report. And since the PowerPoint was only made available tonight, it really is important for the public to be able to kind of look through all this and make additional comments. Similar to Bailey Meadows, there are numerous huge outstanding issues and details that remain unknown and unresolved over ODOT, traffic, housing needs assessments that were mentioned tonight, and more. And these all should have been done prior to bringing this to the Planning Commission, because it is such a big, huge thing, being a comp plan amendment and a zone map change. How can we assume all the goals and codes are met when these important details are not completed? So it really sounds like much of this proposal is half-baked. We recommend that this proposed comp plan amendment and zone change be denied. This is not Bailey Meadows. We are not forced to make a decision here. This is a total discretionary decision on our part, and we need to make sure that we have all the studies and details and everything on board before we make recommendations and get started down that approval pipeline to avoid another Bailey Meadows. I would also encourage you to read the letters that were submitted. It's been the tendency that I've seen for the comments that are received to kind of be implied like they were outside the scope of what you're allowed to consider. That is not the case at all. People objected to the fact that the proposal did not meet the Sandy's criteria for 17.24 for comp plan changes. And they were very specific about that. Responding to the 17.24, the comp plan change can be changed, but we need to do it holistically. And it is piecemealing and spot zoning that is, LCDC really recommends that we not do that. We've already did that with the Avamere property, and that led us to the deficit on the commercial zone. So responding to changing conditions is one of the criteria in your 17.24, and there really are no changing conditions. We just updated the UGB boundary and expanded and rezoned all that to address the lack of commercial land, among other things. And that analysis was done by Tracy himself. There's no new conditions that would overturn the work done in the UGB expansion. In addition, all the land we've already have to meet we already have a lot of land to meet high density needs. Bull Run Terrace gives us an additional 13 acres of surplus high density land to be developed. How does giving all this Bull Run Terrace high density zone change affect the landowners who already have and own existing R3 land? How does it affect the developability, if that's a word, and marketability of those properties? It's going to be a big impact, and presumably those people were not consulted during this proposed comp plan change. It was only the adjacent neighbors. Presumably this Bull Run will saturate that R3 market. Again, no impact, no analysis what was done to the impact of how that affected other R3 landowners. The staff report mentioned that dwelling units could go from 101 to 163 under the proposed zone change, but that does not at all account for the fact that the C3 commercial can have as much high density as the R3 zone. So actually that would give us another 72 units maximum, totaling about 239 when you consider those 4 R1 units that are already included. So that's quite a bit more than the 163. We're up to 239. That's a significant change that affects the ODOT, the traffic, the park dedication lands, and some other things that needs to be incorporated into the analysis. There's the second criteria you all deal with is responding to changing community attitudes. Again, no effort to assess or conclude this zone change is supported by the community. And I think when you look at, you know, people's comments, they are quite opposed to increasing high density zoning in this town. It brings more people, and you know, we've already got a lot of high density zoning to be developed already. We have that adequate supply of high density to meet the demand. We're already one of the fastest growing cities. So I think we can kind of slow that down. Maintaining the integrity of the comp plan is another thing. And again, it's not the responsibility of the city to kind of help make this more money for the developer. We should not be piecemealing it. One thing I am going to point out is the park stuff. Again, that 1.4 acres was proposed. There was a proposal to increase more acreage over by the highway, which really wasn't effective parkland. The park board did not want to reduce the total acres of park. And in fact, when you look at the total number of units that could be developed when you include the commercial, the actual figure would be 2.24 acres, not 1.4. And again, putting that adding to the parkland over by the highway doesn't really meet the need for us. It's great to have the additional parkland as it is, but when you look at how many additional units are coming in, they would be under the requirement for parkland dedication. So there's a lot of different goals. I'm going to submit this letter in place. I'm probably getting up to my 3 minutes, but again, goal 1, 2, there's lots of the 8, goal 12. I've identified the different 17.30, 36, 0.40, 0.46, 0.54, 0.74, 0.80. There's quite a few different things that this whole proposal kind of does not meet the criteria for. I'll add that in the letter and set it into the record, but again, there's so many unknowns and lots more things needed from ODOT, from the housing needs assessment, from the realignment of all the 4 R1 units, house proposals and things like that. I'm just kind of wondering how you can even say that, it's ready to make a recommendation on this. It really isn't. And again, I would definitely encourage you to and ask that you leave the record open so that other people can comment. Thank you.
Before Kathleen leaves, I think David would probably ask for the same thing, maybe not, but Kathleen, are you asking for the record to remain open? Because it will remain open. It's going to City Council.
As opposed to what?
Well, I'm just trying to get clarity on what you're actually asking for. David, do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, the way I take it, it's there will be a record that the Planning Commission develops, and that record, along with the recommendation, will be forwarded on to the City Council. So what I understand the request to be would be that the Planning Commission's record is left open, so additional testimony can be submitted. And then the Planning Commission would reconvene at some point to make a deliberation and decision based on that record. Kathleen can say if it's different, but that's what I understand it to be.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds like you guys have a lot of loose ends and things that need to be finalized. And it's important for the city, for the residents to be able to understand all these, things from ODOT and everything else before, so that they can kind of comment. And so, yes, I would like the public testimony left open. It sounds like you all need to get more details before you can really, make a determination on this and make a recommendation to the City Council. A lot of loose ends.
So you're asking for a continued open record period and then a continuance to another Planning Commission hearing? Is that what you're asking?
It sounds like that's what you need. Yes, I think I am, only just because, I think it's important that you have a full record. If you can get that before the City Council, that's great. But it's important for the city, for the residents to understand what is being proposed. And you've got a lot of loose ends that haven't been explained to the public. So, you know, of this housing, what is it, housing needs assessment, Shelley, is that what you said? From the fair housing folks, the ODOT stuff that's still up in the air. That's always a big one. I just don't want to repeat how Bailey Meadows went down. It just seemed like, you know, when it got to you guys, it was so half-baked. It continued to be half-baked, even to the city council, and it just made for lots of confusion and frustration on everybody's parts.
Okay, that helps. I just wanted to make sure what I was hearing, what you're requesting. It sounds like a continuance to me. Would you agree with that, David?
Yeah, it's a request, and the choice at this point, and we can talk about this at the end, will be the planning commission's either to have a continuance to a date certain, in which case the record, of course, is left open, or the alternative, and it's the planning commission's choice, is to set up an open record period, in which case still come back to the planning commission at a date certain, but there wouldn't be any more oral testimony. At that point, they'd just be considering what has been further submitted in the record. So at the end of tonight, we'll present those options more formally and they can make that decision.
Yeah. And David, my concern is that when there's additional important stuff coming into the record from ODOT and other entities like that, and the city doesn't, I mean, the residents don't have a chance to raise those as issues because we didn't bring it up at the planning commission, that's the concern I have.
Yeah, no, there's no, I mean, it's ultimately this being the first hearing in this regard for this type of quasi judicial matter, anybody like yourself or anybody else can ask for that extension. So it's perfectly appropriate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. Okay, I'm good. Hold on one second. I got to do something logistically to lower her hand. Okay, I got another person that's looking to comment. Anne Rule, I hope I pronounced the last name correct. I am allowing her to speak right now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, my name is Anne Rule. I live at 18368 Meadow Avenue. So this proposal is right behind me. I've been watching it. I've known that it was coming for quite a while. And like other homeowners in the area, I knew that this land would eventually be developed. I'm not going to be near as educated with my words as what Kathleen and some of you are. I'm just a simple homeowner, and I really do not want to see the high density back behind me. I can't stop the growth of Sandy. We need the growth. We need commercial property. I'm glad to see some more commercial property put into this second proposal. But I would like to see that the original zoning go back to more of the single homes, just the residential instead of the high density. To my understanding, Sandy's going to reach a population fairly soon where we won't have a choice of what type of housing goes in, that it'll all need to be multifamily. Why start that now? You know, we don't need to. And I guess just, you know, some of the same things, the traffic being increased on DeBarco, high density can oftentimes bring higher crime into the area. You know, not as safe to walk. You may not feel as safe to walk around. Anyway, you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. I am opposed to this zoning. I'd like to see it stay more single family residential back there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm falling down on the job here. There's a lot to do with taking minutes and doing this.
You're doing good.
The next up is Laura Williams, and I'm enabling her to speak right now.
This is actually Marcoto Lane, 37828 Rachel Drive, Sandy. I'm kind of wondering where in the city, like who set the agenda to promote and push for high density development in Sandy? I'm not quite sure I understand. Was there a memo that was put out or advertisement or something advertising for developers to come and push high density developments, ask for exceptions and stuff like that? Because I kind of feel like the tone was set with the Bailey Meadows subdivision, that basically the developers had their say and Sandy City kind of just puts their tail between their legs and goes, okay, and jumps. I'm also wondering why Todd Mobley is still on the Planning Commission. I'm not sure why he's being allowed to continue to sit there after the Bailey Meadows explosion.
Are you still with us? We can't hear a word you're saying. What do you want to do, Jerry?
Give him one more try. What was his name?
Makoto Lane. He submitted written testimony as well.
Okay. We are not hearing you at all. So it shows your mic is still on.
Hear me now? Oh, can't hear me?
I'm hearing something very faint, Chair.
Yeah.
I say we just move on and with technical difficulties.
I mean, it's sounding like it's going to be a open record period or a continuance or something. So he's going to have more opportunities to submit evidence, either written and or oral, before Planning Commission, plus more before the City Council after that. So
yeah,
I'd probably just end it if I was you.
Yeah, sounds fine. Go ahead.
Sorry, Makoto. I'm going to mute you now. With that, I don't see anybody else's hands raised. You might want to ask them one more time. There's also the neutral testimony opportunity. So
yeah. Okay, this would be the final call for opposition testimony. Click the...
we do have somebody else that just popped up. It's Nicola Skinner, and I am unmuting her right now. Well, allowing her to talk.
Hi, I'm Nikki Skinner, and I live at 18422 Meadow Avenue. So the development's coming behind me, and I know it's going to come behind us. That's just the way it's going to be, you know, here in Sandy, because we're growing, and we love the growth because it brings new people into our community. There's a lot of different things that have not been addressed, and Kathleen had said those. Sorry, I'm a little nervous.
You're fine.
But, you know, I have these really big, huge trees in my backyard. And if they take all the trees out behind me, what's going to happen to my trees? You know, my big, huge 80-foot fir trees. I mean, that's just one thing. We also have a breeding pair of red-tailed hawks. Nobody's addressed that, which I don't have documentation of it. I've just been here for 6 years. And, you know, 21 years in Eagle Creek, but 6 years here in this home here. I do live, work in the community, and I'm just concerned because we all live here, and we all need to address the high density and so forth. And I really appreciate all that you do, and that I'm able to voice my opinion. I had to raise my hand because nobody else did. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can you repeat your address? I didn't catch it. I'm sorry.
18422 Meadow Avenue.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're right behind me.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, you guys.
Any other opponent testimony?
Yes, I have. There's no name. It's 1503-312-2608. Again, that's 503-312-2608. I'm allowing you to speak right now.
They're muted.
Here, I can unmute them. I can ask them to unmute. I can't unmute them if they're on the phone.
Okay. There we go. You have the floor.
Hello?
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So this is Erin Findley, 37616 Rachel Drive here in Sandy. Trying to use my phone and it's not working real well. So I apologize. I just want to, you had mentioned we could keep things short by saying we echo what everyone else says. So just in terms of what Kathleen Walker had shared in keeping the record open, I feel like I'm on a learning curve every time I listen in. I've heard the Planning Commission welcome the community to get more involved, and keeping that record open is huge because a lot of times we are processing after we've listened to you process. So that's just a first request, and I think that's something you guys are already going to do. And then secondly, just echoing what I'm hearing from the few callers that have called in and just watching with Bailey Meadows and being, as a resident, impacted by that. Just continually asking that with whatever is within your powers as a planning commission, that you very carefully consider growth as you're making decisions and recommendations on the council. Having grown up where growth exploded, I'm just hoping that planning commission can continue to be thoughtful and continue to look and alter codes to give yourselves as much, I guess, decision-making power as possible with input from the public so that we can see Sandy grow in a way that residents really support. It would make it, I don't think everyone's anti-growth, but I think it feels like growth is just sort of popping up and the city's hands are tied. And that's when you see sprawl, and I think the city itself can lose value. That wasn't as short as I intended, but thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I am not seeing any other hands raised.
Okay. Our final section is give opportunity for neutral testimony. You're neither for or against the proposal. Have a comment to share with us. Time to raise your hand.
I do not see any hands raised, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. With that, we will move on to staff recap.
Great. I took notes. So responding to the applicant, Kelly and I had some conversation today about the applicant's proposed change to those 13 conditions. We also sent on a copy of Tracy's letter with the proposed changes to Mike Walker, our Public Works Director, to get his input as well. So that's absolutely something that we're looking at. I appreciate Mike Ard's explanation of where that methodological discrepancy is in the traffic impact study. So I'll talk to Kelly and we'll be talking about that. And then I wanted to respond to some of the public comments. You know, I always appreciate people who say what they mean without pulling any punches. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get into city planning. So unfortunately, those comments from ODOT and the Fair Housing Oregon Association, we got really late. The one from FHOA we got on Friday. So this isn't you know, an instance of staff not doing their job. It's an instance of we got these comments in really late, and did our best to include what we could from them. The assertion that we're not following the code 1724 for the comp plan amendments. Kelly and I had a conversation about this today, you know, the possibility of engaging in spot zoning. I did some research on the legal definition of spot zoning and what the criteria are for making a legal case that spot zoning is happening, and this does not meet those criteria. Let's see. There was also, I think, maybe a misunderstanding. I think one of the people making a public comment was talking about House Bill 2001. Talking about, I think there might have been a misunderstanding of it, thinking that it meant that at some point all housing has to be multifamily housing. That's not what House Bill 2001 says. And then, you know, just talking about high density housing, you know, when just, this is not data, this is my own personal experience with high density housing in Sandy. When my husband and I moved out here to Oregon in February, we wanted to live in Sandy, but we certainly can't afford a house in Sandy, and there just wasn't a robust enough rental market. There wasn't anything that was in our price point, and so we live in Gresham because we can't afford to live in Sandy. And so additionally, there's nothing in the code that justifies a priori not allowing high density housing, not allowing additional R3 zoning districts. And then again, just to reiterate what Commissioner Crosby said, that Oregon state law is really limiting and really strict about what the Planning Commission is and isn't allowed to consider in land use decisions. And even though, you know, there are lots of things that we might think are relevant or unfortunate or, you know, things that we would like to see considered, state law says it's the code. It's the municipal code that needs to be addressed. I hope that that addresses some of the concerns that were brought up. Yeah, and if there are any questions from the Planning Commission, I'd be happy to point you to Kelly so he can answer your questions.
I do have a few other things I want to elaborate on. So as Shelley pointed out, I think the ODOT letter we received today at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So yeah, I've looked at it very, very briefly. You know, if there's some methodology misunderstanding between Mike Ard, ODOT's transportation engineer, Avi Tyler, and our engineer, John Replinger, they can sort that out between now and the next hearing. Like we said in the previous legislative hearing, I'm not a transportation engineer, never really wanted to be one. And, you know, if there's methodology errors, I think the three of them really need to work it out because it's really beyond the scope and knowledge of what staff has. The grant of access, ODOT's told me in at least 4 meetings now that I've had with them, that is the process. I don't disagree with the applicant to make it a little bit more loose, but I think we could say something along the lines of grant of access or other approved method as approved by ODOT. In talking to ODOT pretty extensively, I think if we move grant of access, I do think it might be a case where ODOT appeals the decision because they are very, very set on it being a grant of access. And I don't think, and I think the applicant would agree with me, I don't think there's any reason to try to get into kind of a fist fight with ODOT over the terminology. I do agree with Mike Ard that maybe approval is the correct term, but I do want to leave grant of access in there also just because they've been so persistent on it, them being ODOT. And then, you know, we have some other modifications that are being proposed by the applicant that we think are, that were proposed by Tracy Brown that we think were good modifications and we would like to see incorporated into the conditions list. I do think he has a couple conditions that For instance, such as the tract or the easement along the east side of the subdivision, to make that language a little bit more open-ended, I do think is a good idea. He pointed out that because of topography constraints, that having it right along the border might be very difficult. And after he pointed that out, I do think that's very valid. And so I think staff is very understanding of that and would like to work with the applicant and planning commission on revising that code language. A few of the things that they pointed out, such as driveway access and green streets, I believe the conditions said something along the lines of where practicable. Our only intention there was to try to get the best development possible. I don't think the intention of the conditions is that if green streets are practicable, that we'll still require them. So I think some of those conditions that Mr. Brown asked to be struck, I don't know if, eventually maybe the result will be that they're struck, but I think to leave the conditions in there as written still gives the flexibility to staff to work with the applicant during construction plan review and determine if such things as green streets and driveway locations can be moved around. So, like I said, I agree with some of the conditions. I don't agree with others. I just got back from vacation on Saturday, so I didn't have time to prepare like a supplemental memo to Tracy's memo. That would have been the preferred route, but we didn't have time to do that as staff. And then as far as the public comments, I agree with Shelley. There's a lot of passion, and like Shelley, I'm glad to see that there's passion and there's people involved. I live in the city of Sandy myself, as I've pointed out numerous times, so I think it's good when there's people involved. And I'm also very happy to see that there's a number of people involved that are saying that they realize that there would always be development there. It's kind of a fresh thing to hear. So I'm very happy to hear that. I do want to point out only one thing that was said in the public comments, just to clarify something. The Fair Housing Council's letter, Shelley, like she said, just started here in February. That letter is basically a standard letter that they send on any zone change or any large development proposal. There is no problem with the buildable lands inventory. That Ms. Walker is correct that Tracy Brown, who's the planners or the applicant's consulting planner, he and I are the two that completed that study, but there's nothing, it's been acknowledged by the state of Oregon. There's nothing wrong with it. The applicant is not asking to bring any lands now into a deficit. So all we had to do for the Fair Housing Council's letter is to create some findings in the ordinance if council chooses to adopt a zone change, and that in the past has typically satisfied the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. It's nothing that we need to modify in the buildable lands analysis. There's no big study that needs to be done. It's a boilerplate letter. The letter sounds kind of intimidating and like that it's kind of focused on each development, but it's pretty much the same letter we've been receiving for the last 3.5 years now. So, and that summarizes my the staff recap there.
And that fair housing letter usually shows up the day of our meeting.
It does, but I want to be very, they've been very easy to work with in the past. And when we've sent them ordinances with the findings, they will review them. And if they have any issues, they'll point them out and we modify them. So they've been a really easy organization to work with. They are kind of last minute a lot of times, but they've been very easy to work with in the past.
Okay. All right, we need to move on to the rebuttal from the applicant, and Ray and/or Tracy.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Tracy.
Yeah, so
Tracy, let me go first on this one.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Good evening, Chair Crosby, Mike Robinson on behalf of the applicant. I don't think we want to give you a lot of rebuttal tonight because you're either going to leave the written record open or continue the hearing. The public's made that request, and as you know, you're obligated to do it. But before we talk about rebuttal,
before we go there, how about an address?
I was just going to give that to you. Thank you.
Oh, excellent.
My mailing address is 1211 Southwest 5th Avenue, Suite 1900, Portland, Oregon 97204. Before we do our rebuttal, if we could, Chair Crosby, could we talk about whether you're going to continue the public hearing or just leave the written record open? Our preference, and you have the choice, as David told you, our preference would be that you just continue the public hearing. If you were going to do that, can you tell us what the continued hearing date would be?
I know it's during your rebuttal time right now, but I will answer that quickly. One thing, if we do continue it, we have to give a date certain. We won't be discussing that until later.
Well, I'm hoping, I apologize for interrupting. It would be our preference that you just continue it to the next date available. But if it's 2 or 3 months off, then we would prefer that you leave the written record open and then come back and deliberate at the next possible meeting.
Okay, that we'll have to have that discussion later
Okay.
to set that date specific.
Well, that's our request, Chair Crosby. So let me talk just a little bit about what we heard tonight. So our obligation as the applicant, and you know this from your work on the Planning Commission, we have to meet our burden of proof demonstrating that the approval criteria are met. And frankly, you have a very complete application. You have a thorough staff report that explained how all the approval criteria is met. And it's based on a thorough application that contains a substantial amount of evidence demonstrating why the approval criteria is satisfied. So the application is, as staff has found, able to be approved. The only 2 documents that have come in are those that Kelly and Shelley talked about. The Fair Housing Council letter, Kelly's exactly right. It's essentially a form letter. And all they ask for are what's called adequate factual basis for the decision. That's required by Goal 2. I think you already have that in the record, but I think what Kelly described is an appropriate way to handle it. And you shouldn't have any trouble addressing their testimony. The ODOT letter is fairly, it looks dense, but there's not that much to it. We can talk, I don't think we need to talk about the grant of access tonight, but we can do that in our written submittal. But the other thing I want to talk about real quickly are a couple of issues raised by Ms. Walker. Shelley already talked about one of them. Spot zoning is not recognized in Oregon. Spot zoning is a concept that's recognized generally in the rest of the United States. The reason we don't recognize it in Oregon is because everything that we do is based on the plan. So if you find that the plan map amendments are appropriate, everything you're doing is consistent with the plan, that's not spot zoning, that's consistency with the plan, which is what our planning process is all about. Ms. Walker raised a number of issues concerning the goals, Goal 1, Goal 2, and Goal 8, and Goal 12. Goal 1 is citizen participation. You're doing what your code requires and what state law requires. There's no doubt you've met Goal 1. Goal 2 is a requirement really of 2 things, that you coordinate with affected governmental entities like ODOT, and you've done that. And the other obligation under Goal 2 is an adequate factual base, which you have in your record. Goal 8 is a recreational goal. It's usually not raised because if you actually read the goal, most of it deals with destination resorts, which are outside of urban growth boundaries. But to the extent Goal 8 is relevant at all, I think it's met because you implement Goal 8 through Sandy Development Code Chapter 17.86, and you've got a willing applicant that wants to dedicate parkland and understands that they have to comply with the code requirements for how uses butt up against that parkland. The last goal is Goal 12. That's implemented through the TPR. Goal 12 is pretty straightforward. It says in an application like this, you have to have a safe and adequate transportation system. That's why you have a transportation impact study by Mr. Ard that concludes that it will be adequate and it's safe. And most importantly, it's consistent with what your acknowledged TSP already shows, which is DeBarco connecting to the state highway. So all of the goals are satisfied. The application does a good job of addressing them. The staff report does a good job of explaining how they're satisfied. So with that, Chair Crosby, if you have any questions, you have Tracy, Mike, and Ray, myself, please ask us. Otherwise, our preference would be when you discuss it that you continue the hearing to a date certain. But if you do leave the record open, we would prefer three 7-day periods until August 31st for anyone to submit argument and evidence, until September 7th for anyone to rebut what comes in during the first period, until September 14th for the applicant to make final written argument. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you. Did you have more, Tracy?
Not really. I mean, the only thing I was going to say is on the conditions that were, I guess, in question, and Kelly addressed them a little bit. I think at this point, since the hearing may be continued or the record open, I would just suggest that we kind of address that at a later date. I think the ones that we presented, such as the green streets, that was just more of a request. It's probably fine as is, because I think finding will be that they aren't practicable, since, as Mike or as Ray talked about. A few of the other ones, I'm not sure exactly the ones Kelly was talking about, but I think there seems to be enough common ground. I'm comfortable moving forward and working those out prior to the next hearing. I don't think we have anything. Anybody else have anything?
All right, thank you. Okay, that brings us to ourselves. And Ron, you've been wanting to raise your hand for some time.
I have been. So going back to staff at this time, I'm kind of backing up the cart a little bit and looking over the side here at my notes just to keep me on track so I don't ramble too much. But I'm trying to figure out, when reading through the letters from the existing neighborhood folks that are there, I think they have more than passion. I think they have some real legitimate issues that they're raising. If I had moved in there and looked at what was going to be nearby or even in my backyard, I have R1. And now this proposal takes anybody that backs up to it and to R3 for lot 5, right? And so I'm trying to, what drove the density to go from 101, and we could be here, not even be here tonight, and take it to 120 or 121, and it could be approved, as I understand it, by staff with a 20% variance. But we're here tonight and we're going up to 163. That's a huge increase from what people in the neighborhood thought they were going to get. So I can't see, and when I read through, and I saw it in numerous places, but in the staff report on page 14, it says the code change is driven by, and I'm quoting, the analysis of the Highway 26 infrastructure investment requirements were too great to be offset by the value of the underlying property. So we need more units to pay for the street improvements, etc. That's how I interpret it. Now, I go back, and we had Sandy Balt that came in and said they couldn't do Sandy style because of the cost. And we said, that's not our concern. And I can't see making a code change or changing the R1 to R3, etc., based upon a money issue. Maybe it's the city comes in and partners up some of the money. But I'm thinking about the existing people that are living there. And again, it's been pointed out, we already have enough R3. This is purely underlying to get not more money into the developer's pocket, but it's to pay for the infrastructure. And I don't like to see it being paid for the infrastructure at the deficit of the people that are living in that area already. So maybe I'm misinterpreting, I'm not seeing something, but the jump in the density is to pay for the infrastructure. And again, I think it's our job to sit here and fight for the existing neighborhood people that are in there. Anyway, so that's kind of my trying to figure out what brought upon this big code change. I love the parks. I think the commercial piece there is nice. The streets all look nice, etc. But you know, if I bought in that neighborhood, I think they have a really valid point. There's some of those folks that are going to have apartments where they thought they might have a duplex. Anyway, that's
they might end up with a bunch of duplexes. You know, I agree with what you say, Ron. I'd been doing some arithmetic here while this has been going on. Because of House Bill 2001, SFR is gone. R1, SFR is gone. We just might as well accept that. And the public needs to understand and accept that. It's not a Sandy decision. It's maybe the state of Oregon. We're more than 10,000 people. And anybody who's got a single family residential lot can build a duplex. So those 48, I'm looking at the existing right now, that says their data that the net number of units would be 48. If you make them all duplexes, which they can do because of state law, as we implement, it's going to be 96. So that's going to put 149 units there. So what they're proposing is 163. So I think the 100 number is a number based upon the existing redraw of the code, which had kind of R2. Keep in mind, R2 isn't duplexes. R2 is multifamily. You know, it includes common wall. You know, the difference is the maximum there is 14 units per acre versus 20.
I understand the density that's there, but again, looking at lot 5, that could have been coming in to be R2 to soften it to the existing neighborhood as well.
Well,
so, can I elaborate a little bit on what you're asking, Ron?
Yes.
So if you were to look at the pre-app notes, we did request, staff requested that there would be single family homes along the entire border of Deer Point subdivision. So our first proposal, or our first idea, is we would be supportive of the zone change. So as long as the park was installed where the applicant's proposing it, and then so that single family homes, which Don's right, once House Bill 2001 takes effect in Sandy, which will be by June at the latest, they would either be single family homes or duplexes along the east side of Deer Point. So the applicant did accommodate our request and put some single family homes north of DeBarco, which I don't believe was on the original pre-app request. As you'll notice, south of DeBarco, there's still apartments. Our preference as staff would still be to have single family homes along the other ones. We did also, as staff, if you look at the pre-app notes, want more tree retention along the common lot line of the proposed subdivision and Deer Point subdivision as well. I do know the applicant looked at it, but there's some utilities that have to run through there. However, staff was still in support of additional tree retention along the common lot line. So that's all in the pre-app notes. We can supply those pre-app notes at the next meeting if you'd like, just so you know what staff had advised the applicant on what we would prefer to see. Now, in saying that, I think there's some things like that could be modified that would make this more palatable for the neighborhood and for the commission. In saying that, though, I don't think this is all driven by money. In the recommendations list that we put on page 31 at the bottom and at the top of page 32 in the staff report, we listed 7 reasons why staff is supportive of the proposal, and that we believe it's accomplishing some major goals consistent with long-range planning objectives in the city, including extension of DeBarco Road and connecting it with the highway, installing street to the south, as Tracy pointed out, consistent with DSP, extending Fawn Street, expanding the park and developing it, creating available commercial land in the C3, because right now you can't, that C3 land out there is undevelopable until DeBarco Road's put in. The highway, ODOT's not going to allow that C3 land to take direct access to the highway. So we believe it's fulfilling that need. We also believe it's fulfilling needs as defined in the urbanization study, which is elaborated in the staff report. And we also believe it's providing consistency with the 2040 plan in 1997 that says that there should be a mixture of housing types. Now, in saying that, I live in a single family home in Sandy, I do. I'm not going to deny it. But if you look at the comp plan, which is supposed to be the guiding document for Sandy for the last 23 years, it is wanting a more of mixture of housing than I think what we currently do. The majority of what we approve and what's built in Sandy since I've worked here is single family homes, with the exception of a few apartment complexes. And staff felt that by approving this, we'd be accomplishing some major goals as we laid out in the recommendations. So I see that the perception could be that we're only recommending approval because it's helping foot the bill for some of these utilities and road extensions, but I think it goes a step beyond that if you look at our recommendations list.
I think that I didn't mean to imply somebody's making money off or anything, but yeah, when I read through it, it's to pay for the infrastructure that's there. And I'm coming back with, again, I'm not against the density. I'm trying to put in there for the existing neighborhood some way of softening the break in between the two. And the same thing that the staff had recommended. And just going back on that, and I think it's our job to fight for the people of Sandy that are there to make that transition better than what I see on paper here. And again, that's echoing the people that are talking about the density that they see coming. So, but it comes back to, again, Sandy has always had the thing where development pays for itself. This is a huge deal. I know the city needs it. It's great for the traffic infrastructure, et cetera. I just don't want to see it. If I was living there, I wouldn't want to see it at my cost of living there in the neighborhood that I thought was going to be one way.
Well, it's going to be a line. There's always going to be a line. Look at our whole map of the city, and we have the zones, and there's always a line between one zone and another zone, no matter what. So, you know, I guess I'm not as harsh kind of on it, and I do agree with Mr. Robinson when he said, you know, it's a pretty complete application. I get a feeling that some of the public wants to see every dot and every I. They think that's the way planning works. Well, you know, the first thing you do when you build a house is you start making changes. If you ever build a house, if you ever think you're going to get it perfect, you don't. That's not the way it works. So I don't think that's a fair thing to basically say. I was a little surprised that I didn't hear. It's interesting, you know, a decent number of people when they testified on Bailey Meadows said, oh, you're supposed to have affordable housing. How come you're putting single family residences over there? Well, now we're there. Now we're going to put affordable housing in. By definition, affordable housing means higher density housing. Simple. Okay. And well, now we got a problem kind of with that. You know, it's like not in my backyard. So, you know, there is going to be higher density housing. People just need to understand that and accept that. And the way I would suggest they do that is understand that every one of those single family residential lots, 5,000 square feet or greater, can have a duplex on it. And developers will figure out if that's the most economically efficient thing to do and kind of go from there. So, you know, the only thing constant in the world is change, and some things are changing. You know, I think it might be good for some of the people to go up and look at the apartments that were just built up on Sandy Heights. And, you know, they're built right next to R2. They're in R2. And, you know, we had a lot of testimony on it, and look at what that basically says. I don't know why you assume that just because you have higher density that you're going to have more crime. That's a Black Lives Matter. That's a People's Lives Matter thing. That because people don't have a lot of money, oh, they must be criminals. So I don't think we need to make that assumption right off of the bat. You know,
John, not to interrupt you, but I wasn't making that assumption. That I wasn't the narrative that came in from people talking about this going to bring in crime. That wasn't mine at all. Mine again was.
No, that was public. That was what the public said, though. So I was reacting to what the public said, just like you were.
I thought you were taking that from my comments. So
no, not from your comments at all. I jotted down when public is commenting, you know, some of the things that, you know, I've seen. You know, yeah, I understand trees are in somebody's, you know, they can see trees behind them, but are they on your property? If trees aren't on your property, somebody can cut them down. So that's just the way it is. You know, and developers have rights too. That's one thing I hope the public starts to understand, is that you have rights, but developers have rights, and the city is in the middle. And that's why the code is the way it is, and why we have to do things in a very structured way, because the city has paid out in the past some serious money because we didn't go by the code. So, you know, we need to basically do it. I am a little confused on one thing, and that is the staff saying that they wanted buildings to face the park on the C3 land at the same time that they say are requiring a buffer. So what's the purpose of putting a buffer in and then saying that the buildings are going to face? I mean, I understand the whole deal about the residents facing the park. I brought it up before, but I think you need to look at the C3 piece and the fact that they have a large area they're retraining trees, and then to say what commercial is going to go in there, and don't put so many restrictions on it that the commercial can't go in there now when we don't meet our goal. So if there's going to be a buffer between the park and the C3, I don't necessarily see why the buildings can't face a different direction. That's all a function of whenever they come in with a proposal, because that will be a separate hearing, right, Kelly? The whole development of the C3 is a separate conditional use. So, but
not necessarily, not if it's a permitted outright use that they propose.
Yeah. So anyway, I have a concern that, you know, we want to see that developed. And so you kind of say, what's it going to be? You know, like maybe a convenience store, something, you know, or what's going to go in there? I don't know. Maybe some, a mall that has some dress shops or whatever is going to be there. But if you say that they all have to face the park, which means all of the parking and everything's got to be there, and then the trees are over here, and next thing you know, you can't build anything on it. So I think buffering the park against C3 probably meets the objective of as opposed to saying that the buildings have to face the park. I'd just like you to think about that.
Appreciate those comments, Hollis.
I just want to reiterate or second what Don just said. Higher density does not mean higher crime. And, you know, we live in an area that's very expensive and people can't afford to live in Portland anymore. They're moving out this way. As Shelley mentioned, it's hard for, you know, it's hard for people to be able to afford to live in Sandy. And I think it's important that we do start making sure there's mixed use. I think it is funny that we were just hearing complaints about the single family houses, and especially about the price of them. These newer houses that are going in are very expensive. And so I just think we need to make way for multiple types of housing to accommodate all people. And I had a quick question. Kelly, did we decide that to protect trees when they are going through development, that the trees are having metal fences now? Is that right? Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, you are. It's a 6-foot high fence. Yeah, I mean, it was always in the code. It was just, we sometimes enforced and it didn't. But now I'm not signing off on the erosion control until that's installed. So no more than polyurethane or fencing, because that just gets knocked over when they're doing construction.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. I want to, before we move off any further, while we're still at least a little bit more alert than we might be in an hour, to decide, it sounded to me, and David, you can help us here. My understanding with the request for the open record as it was described, that we obviously have to have another planning commission meeting. And it sounds like it is either we keep the record open, and in that second meeting, we only discuss, no more public comment, and we only discuss what's been introduced in the record. The other option was to continue it to a date certain where we would take more public comment. Are there two options, or?
Yep, you got it exactly right. Yeah, it's anybody can request a continuance or request the record remain open, and then it's your choice as to which one to pick, and you described it exactly right. If you go the continuance route, which is historically what the Planning Commission has done, that would just be picking a time and date certain, and you would just continue the hearing. So you would allow for additional testimony, and implicit in that is that during that time, people can submit additional testimony into the record as well. You could also do it as we did with the Bailey Meadows decision, and maybe one or two prior to that, and that is setting up open record periods, usually measured in weeks or a week to 2 weeks, and then that information with a sort of an updated staff recommendation would be brought back to the Planning Commission at a future meeting, and you would just deliberate. You wouldn't take any more public testimony, oral testimony or otherwise. So it's really your call. The planning applicant has expressed a preference one way, but it's entirely your call. I generally think that most people want the opportunity to speak again. That's at least, again, been my experience in at least in working with Sandy. So historical practice would suggest that you pick a date certain and continue it, but it's completely the Planning Commission's choice. And you're not able, either way you go, I think this part is obvious at this point anyway, is that you don't make a decision tonight. That would be made at that meeting.
But Can I just chime in for a second? When we did those open record periods for Bailey Meadows, I think we did them for Planning Commission and City Council, and then something else we did too, I believe, like David said. I think they worked in some regards, but I can just tell you they created a lot more work for staff. And then they created kind of an issue with when we put it on the website, some people complained that they didn't get noticed of the new open record periods so they could make their rebuttal. So they didn't know they could make a rebuttal. I think it's just way cleaner if we can just come back and let people orally present again. I think it would save staff a ton of time and remove the confusion of the open record periods.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I was just going to kind of check around with the other commissioners if you had strong feelings one way or the other. Either way, it's another meeting. One would be with public testimony. One would just be our deliberation. Comments?
I personally like the way the Bailey Meadows went because it was cleaner on the meeting side, but I don't like the extra work it puts on staff. They're a little more pressed for time than we are. Not to say that we aren't, but.
Mm-hmm.
Chair, I was gonna, I say I would suggest that we keep it open to a date certain to allow more public comment, since it seems I don't have all the answers I need either.
Now, but are you saying we have to keep it open for public comment, but are you saying for us to come back and deliberate without more public testimony, or to offer public testimony at our next meeting?
Offer public testimony at our next meeting.
Okay.
Do we have any idea what the date of that we'd hear it next? If it were just.
That's going to be the challenge.
Okay, you're on, Kelly.
I would agree with what Chris just said in terms of leaving it open and allowing public comment. We're inviting people into the process, and I think we should make that available to them.
I mean, I'm okay with that. It's just, Kelly, you know, you've got the world stacked for the next few months, so, you know, what makes sense?
Yeah, I was going to reiterate on Hollis's comment. I did get a few comments, whether it was perception or reality, that by not allowing testimony at the hearing, they felt like we were kind of taking away their First Amendment rights, which I kind of see their point a little bit. Even though it's within the law, it does kind of seem odd. So as far as dates, September 28th is not going to be possible. So the option would be October 26th, or we would have to find another hearing date that is not on our regular rotation. So it'd be 2 months. Sorry, it'd be the hearing 2 months from now, or it would be another date that we'd have to look through our calendars and come up with an alternative date. Might take
Are you saying that it could work on the 26th? I mean, you know the agenda right now.
I currently don't have anything scheduled for the 26th.
Okay.
I have an annexation and a PD on the 28th, so it would be impossible to hold it that night. But it could be on the October 26th Planning Commission date. If it does go to that, then we would have to re-notice for the City Council meeting at a later date, but I mean, that's fine. I mean, I guess regardless of when you continue it to, if it's October 26th or another date alternative to September 28th, the City Council meeting's probably going to have to be moved.
Yeah.
The date currently is.
Since we are, go ahead, Todd.
Oh, I don't want to step on your toes, Chair, but I don't know, but the applicant may want to have enough time. I'll just say we haven't asked any questions of the applicant or really had much dialogue, but I'll say having those ODOT comments outstanding seems to be a big deal for transportation, for example. Even if we got them back next month, I'm not sure that gives them enough time to get resolution on that issue. So maybe October looks favorable to them. I don't know, but it seems like schedule-wise, that might be okay.
That's where I was going next, was to ask, I've got 4 applicants here, so anybody can speak, but how does the October 26th date look? Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Chair Crosby, and I think Tracy wants to talk as well. October 26th is fine. We would prefer sooner, but we understand the workload. And I personally agree with what I've heard the commissioners say. I think it's better to let folks come back and talk. So that's in part why we wanted to come back and talk as well.
Yeah, I would say that's fine. I talked to and got a consensus from our team that October 26th would work.
Okay.
Jared, can I ask a question or two before you do
Yeah.
anything, just
Yeah.
for educational wise? This one's for Shelley, but you made it for me to Kelly, as you said you might. You talked about spot zoning, as did Mike Robinson. And I did a little research on that term because I was unfamiliar with it. And I read a lot about it over the last week and learned a lot about it, but I was unfamiliar of any legal requirements in order to meet spot zoning. And you said you looked at that and we did not. Can you share with us and the public what those legal requirements were?
Yeah, so the big one, which Mike brought up, is that it's not a legal thing. It's not a legal concept in Oregon. Let me see if I can find. So the sort of traditional, the textbook definition of spot zoning is the process of singling out a small parcel of land for a use classification, totally different from that of the surrounding area, for the benefit of the owner of such property and to the detriment of other owners. And arguably, spot zoning is antithetical to good zoning practices. Let me see if I could find.
That's the same definition
And
I had written down, by the way, too.
I can, you know, back up or reinforce that notion that it is not a concept that is recognized in Oregon simply because you have, when it comes to whether it's a zone change only, or in this case, even a step further with a comp plan change, so many levels of analysis that the applicant has to show in order to get that approved, that a spot zoning issue comes up when it's basically a decision that's kind of made in a vacuum. And so, as Shelley mentions, maybe going in the middle of a residential area, just plopping down a commercial zone, and there really isn't much deliberation or thought given to why that would happen, and certainly nothing guiding in any real material way that decision. That can't happen here, just by virtue of the way the system is set up. So there's cases that stand for that say the concept isn't recognized here.
Yeah.
I also want to add one quick thing to that, Commissioner Mayton, as well, that so since the comp plan is 23 years old now, and we've had a lot of voices in the past couple months with Bailey Meadows and stuff say that they want smart growth and smart planning. I don't know if you can have smart growth and smart planning with following a comp plan map that's 23 years old and saying that until the next comp plan is adopted, we're not going to have any flexibility to that comp plan. I think that's too rigid and doesn't allow for creative zoning and creative planning. I mean, right now we're looking at doing a comp plan update, but realistically, with the cost of doing it and going out for a grant, it's probably not going to be done until 2025 or so. So I think it would be unrealistic to say until a comp plan is adopted that we're not going to do any more zone changes or any more comp plan changes. To me, that is not good planning, to just stick with something that was done in 1997. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up too.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be my next question, and not really a question, but just a question that was going to provoke an answer that would give response to the public about inconsistency with our comp plan and the age of it and what impact it would have on our community going forward. So I think that was a good answer for the public to hear as well. I'll go on the record now. I do like what Commissioner Wazowski talked about when it says listening to the residents and getting their opinions, and that's why I support continuing the hearing to October and allowing them to speak. I have concerns with the breakup of the property myself, and how it's laid out currently versus how it was expected to be laid out. And I would like to know more about what the detriment of the impact will have specifically around the high density. I too have concerns about it going to an R3. I do believe the city needs more multi-use. I do believe we need more affordable housing. I will also tell you I'm an avid supporter of population growth because that's how dollars are brought into the city from state agencies. So population does help, but we need the infrastructure to help support it. And I'm anxious to hear more about how this plot progresses.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate your comments too, Ron, because it's an issue that, well, what I'm thinking of is some places where we talk about, you know, realtors tell us that it is never going to be developed. That's one thing. But I think a realtor back in the day looking at this zoning would have been right to say it's not going to be developed this way by looking at the zoning map and seeing that that area against Deer Point is zoned R1. The other cases where we have it is where it's, you know, the example that Don gave up on Sandy Heights, that had been zoned R2 for a long, long time. And that's a different situation. And this one, the expectations of the neighbors are legitimate because of the zoning. And I appreciated you pointing that out. Helped.
Well, and I also want to just go back again is I want us to be consistent because we have gone through many times and thrown out people saying it's too expensive. Okay, I can't do it. I can't afford to do it. Well, if it's too expensive to do it with the zoning, with more in reason what I'd like to see from what it currently is, then okay. I mean, we've told other people, then don't do it if it's too expensive. But when I read through the documents supplied by the applicant and from the cities, both echoing that the reason we're doing this is because we need to pay for the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And I go back again, as well, maybe they go maybe to change underlying philosophy within the city in terms of maybe the city needs to partner into it. I don't know. I don't want to get anybody, I'll probably get thrown off by making that comment, but, and that's okay. But we're getting to the point where the development needs to pay for itself. It just doesn't work that much anymore. It's hard to put these major roads in like Kelly and his staff would really like to do because they're always looking for somebody to pay for it. And now we're going back through and we're trading somebody's backyard for denser housing so we can pay for a road. So anyway.
Yeah.
Can I just clarify one thing? They will be eligible for SDC credits for any road that is in the capital improvement plan, such as DeBarco Road. So they would get some SDC credits back for that.
That's
so
good.
It helps.
I just like us during this period of time to look at the way that it's zoned right now and look at the way that they're proposing to change it. And it's not that much different. There's not that much difference between R2 and R3, considering the fact you can put duplexes on all of the single family residential lots. So I'm just looking at the map and the facts right now. They've taken the amount of commercial and flipped it to the other side of DeBarco and made it bigger. They've created a buffer along the single family residential that has, you know, the little tent around the bottom against what Kelly recommended. It has maybe a little bit of apartment, but the apartments are all off to the right. On the current zone map in R2, which the apartments are on the east side of DeBarco, they're all over there. So I want us to make sure we kind of cut through the emotion of, I don't want it here, to being fair with the developer and saying, what are they basically trying to do? And I agree with Kelly said there's some real advantages to the city of Sandy in conductivity, no different than what eventually ended up with Bailey Meadows, with another exit out of a complete different neighborhood and a whole nother, major road, which I agree with Ron, is it's hard to get development to basically do it. No different than the city council is trying to do a 362nd. So, I mean, I understand what the neighborhood is basically saying, but I also believe developers have rights, and I'm saying what developers proposing, and is it reasonable for that piece of ground when you consider, if you look on the zone map across the street and all the way down the north side is all R2. So, I mean, there's no spot zoning here. The whole area is set up. There's apartments right across Highway 26 from this property that you were all aware of. So the new ones were just built off to the east. So
I think it's a little more than emotion. I kind of challenge you. I feel like that's coming back to me a little bit because I was one that brought up. It's not emotion. Is the difference between the R2 and R3, if it was your backyard, would be huge. Okay. And I'm just talking about a softening going from the R1 to the R3. I know that it's going to be developed. Again, I'm just looking for what I think are the most important things, and that's the people that are living there today. I'm all for the multi-unit, the denser housing. I think it makes sense. But again, I'm looking, that's what we're here for, is I think to look out for, again, the people that are there and what they thought was coming. So I'm just reiterating myself again, so I apologize for that.
That's fine, Ron. And
I want to add something, Don.
I appreciate that. The thing is, it's going to happen somewhere in Sandy. If you don't do it here, somebody else is going to be upset because it's going to be in their backyard.
Well, again, I don't know why lot 5 couldn't be R2 and step it down that way. Or, I mean, city staff is echoing, Kelly said, the same thing I saw when I read through it.
Yeah,
okay.
But maybe that's a possibility. Go ahead,
Chris.
I was just going to say, I'm not trying to contradict Don. I'm just trying to. So you said there's not, or you said your exact phrase was there is little difference between an R2 and an R3, and I beg to differ. There's a ton of difference if you're a homeowner in that subdivision. It's not a little change; it's a massive change between R2 and R3, just from the look and the feel of the arterial complex. And I'm not debating that whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent tonight. I'm just saying I don't think that. I think that's what we're hearing. And I don't think that's emotion. I think that's homeowners that live in that area saying, we don't want high rise. We'll take condos or we'll take townhomes, but we don't want high rise around that area. And that's just my interpretation of it. And I think we just need to be cognizant of that, because that's what I'm hearing from them. And I'm a little concerned about that myself, just from, traffic and safety there. But I do understand what we need in our community, at least from my perspective, as far as affordable housing and plot management. So,
well, listen, we will all have another opportunity to discuss this, and it'll be 2 months out. In the interest of time, we need to wrap up tonight. I don't know that anything more earth-shaking is going to happen after. Some say it won't happen after 10. But we do need a motion to continue the public hearing to October 26th. It was 26, correct? I believe. And, you've got 2 months. We've got 2 months to mull this over. And there'll be another staff report and more paper coming out. And maybe just to remind us to be careful of the ex parte contact. Watch those emails that may come directly to us. And if you're like me and you see anything on the subject or the opening line, I just delete it. Look for it in the public record and because it often will show up there as well.
You can also just forward those, to Kelly, and he'll make sure it gets in the record, and that way you don't have any issue that way as far as ex parte goes.
Yeah, just to reiterate, forward them to the planning@ci.sandy.or.us, because that goes to Shelley, Emily, I, and the administrative support staff that actually help us compile the record for the website. So that's really the email address it needs to go to.
Good. Okay, with that said, we just need a motion, and this one will be an easy one, is to continue the public hearing until October 26th.
Chairman, I present a motion to extend 19-050 Bull Run Terrace to October 26, 2020 for the public hearing.
I'll second that.
Moved by Chris, seconded by Ron, to continue this public hearing to our meeting on October 26, 2020. Let's go for a roll call vote.
Okay, Commissioner Carlton?
Yes.
Commissioner Lasowski?
Yes.
Commissioner McLean-Wenzel? I saw her say yes. She's muted, but Commissioner Logan?
Yes. Yes.
Got it. Commissioner Mobley?
Yes.
Commissioner Mayton?
Yes.
Chairman Crosby?
Yes. Okay.
We can just adjourn now. We don't have that.
Yes, we don't have questions for staff. So another motion that will be easy to make.
Jerry, can I make a comment?
If it's less than 2 minutes or not over 2 minutes.
Oh, it's only going to take 30 seconds.
Go.
Kelly, I appreciate your comments and from the public. Since most of the public is on still, I like to remind the public that we are commissioners. We also have First Amendment rights. We can differ, but that doesn't mean that just because we differ, that we should be accused of violating other people's rights.
Okay. Motion?
I motion that we adjourn.
I second it.
Been moved and seconded to adjourn. I won't call for a roll call vote. Just wave your hands or thumbs up. All right. Meeting ended. We'll see you all in one month.
Everybody have a good night. Or
Thanks.
what's left of it.
Yeah.